Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Jank Tank, episode number 32 here. My name's Timothy Zaccanino, hosting for you all today. I'm joined by both of the boys on the line. I've got Teld and Chris here to talk about MTG Foundations. What's the hype level on the set, boys?
There's no hype.
I actually am more excited
No.
about this than I thought I was going to be. I have had a level of disengagement with Magic for a little while because for me it comes in waves. Usually, like in previous periods, I will like obsessively refresh the spoiler channel to see I don't read every single card. And for the last couple sets, I haven't found myself doing that as much. But I was really shocked to see the number of cards in this set that I think are actively interesting for a lot of cubes because it's got core set typey cards when they're strong are good for cube because they're more like generalist. They go into more generalist archetypes than typical limited sets, which tends to make for good cube cards. But core sets tend to be pretty weak, so there's that trade-off. But when you get good cards that are designed to be generally applicable for a more core setty environment, sometimes you get good stuff, and I think we got some pretty good stuff here.
Yeah, it's a clean set. I'll give it that. We're going to talk about a decent number of cards here, but outside of the jumpstart stuff, we're talking about cards that have one effect and they tell you what it does and you don't have to do any mental gymnastics on it. Teld, you said no hype?
Yeah, there's some interesting cards in this set, and I'm sure I'll get excited talking about them. But as far as the set itself, this is just kind of it's a whatever set. I think I'm pretty cool with it conceptually being a way to onboard people into playing Magic, but I somehow feel like the steps they would need to take to actually make this good at doing that, they're not going to actually do, which would be making the packs cheaper so that you could get newer drafters a cheaper experience to draft, or keeping it in queue on Arena and making, again, lower cost of entry so that newer players could get a little bit of an easier time learning to draft. I think that would be the most valuable thing they could do with this set, and I think there's a 0% chance they do that.
No, none of that's happening. I am okay with this set existing. As I'll talk about here in a couple minutes, I think this is a not for me set, and I think that's fine. It's completely inoffensive, but also I have virtually no hype over it. I have individual card hype, but as far as the entire set, I'm just kind of Chris and to some extent Teld can attest to the fact that I'm not a core set fan. I never have been. But before we get into kind of the breakdown of Foundations and start talking about some cards, I do want to remind everybody that the best way to support Jank Diver Gaming and the Jank Tank podcast is to join the Discord server. Come draft with us, give us your feedback. It's a great place to hang out with like-minded individuals and talk about Cube, the retail limited set, all things Magic. You can find links to our Discord server wherever you're listening to this podcast. We host tons of scheduled drafts throughout the week, including our Peasant Cube on Saturday nights, the mainline Jank Diver Cube, which is kind of the crux of what we're going to be reviewing around today. We draft that on Sunday nights, and we have F&M style drafts on Fridays where our players vote on a cube to play. We also get some various guest cubes in there created by members of our server throughout the week, so there's always plenty to do. You can check out our socials on Twitter at JankDiverGaming, YouTube.com/JankDiverGaming, and you can find Teld streaming on Twitch.tv/TeldTalks, also on YouTube on Teld Talks. Normally we would spend the first 20 minutes of a review episode talking about new mechanics and returning to mechanics and stuff like that. As far as I know, there are no new mechanics in the set. It's all returning mechanics. The set is half reprint, half new cards, but I don't believe there are any new mechanics. Correct me if I'm wrong there if you guys saw something. But it's all reprints. The theme of the set is more of a check-in on Magic. It's got that classic core set theme of here's a bunch of random high fantasy stuff. Here's a bunch of characters from a bunch of different planes. Here's a bunch of different planes that are just represented on cards, but it's not really time agnostic. It's not really accounting for what's going on in the lore. So Liliana Dreadhorde General is in this set, which isn't indicative of where Liliana is as a character, things like that. So this is just classic core set vibes as far as pulling from Magic lore and Magic planes and stuff like that goes. The point of this set is to create a backbone for Standard. I believe the kind of selling point here is that everything that's in this set is going to be legal in Standard until at least 2029 and possibly beyond that. So you're talking everything here is standard legal for 5 years. So if there's anything broken, like, sorry, standard players. But, you know, your cards like Day of Judgment, your cards like Land of War Elves, you've got an opt in this set. You've got a bunch of bare bones effects. Those are just legal in standard and are kind of, I don't know if they're going to warp things around them so much as, like, they're things that you have to account for when every new set comes out. It's like, oh, Land of War Elves is in standard. Like, this 3-drop is suddenly more interesting because I know there's always going to be a 1-mana dork for it. Things like that. So I would describe this as a not for us set in the sense that, like, standard is kind of the focus here, but we'll still get plenty to talk about for Cube. Like Chris said, there's going to be enough stuff that's just generically powerful. One thing I actually really like about this structure is that you can include cards like Negate and Disenchant and Sorcerer's Spyglass, like these constructed plants that always end up taking like these filler spots in Limited. You no longer have to put those in Limited sets moving forward. Like, if they're literally not applicable to the Limited format, you don't have to put them in those sets and just eat up common and uncommon slots, because you now have this, like, this standard set, this foundation set where you can print those, and it just makes them standard legal forever. So you know how, like, every 4 sets we get Negate or something like that? You don't have to do that anymore. And Negate's, like, hardly ever playable in the Limited formats. Like, you just don't have to do that. So I think that's kind of cool.
It does mean there's quite a number of those in this set, though.
That is true. Yeah, that is true. You'll see them here. Though I believe some number of them are in the standard collection rather than the actual limited set. So the set got a little bit messy as far as like the add-ons go. There's Jumpstart 2025, which is a separate set, but is tied into the release of Foundations. We will be talking about Jumpstart 2025 today because as far as I know, unless you guys have heard otherwise, as far as I know, everything in Jumpstart will be coming to Arena as well, even though it's not standard legal. And then there's also this thing called a standard collection. It's about 350 cards. It's meant to be like a collection in a box for a new player. They can spend $60 and suddenly they have kind of all the tools that they need for standard. But that includes 350 new cards that, or not new cards, but reprints and things like that that aren't part of the mainline set, but are still coming to Arena and are still standard legal. So that's another 350 something cards we have to parse through for the purposes of this review. And messy. Then the final thing, the final thing is special guests, but yeah, that's kind of the breakdown of what Foundations is doing. There's no new mechanics to talk about. I mean, they have some headlining mechanics like Raid and Threshold and Flashback that are kind of like defining color pairs, but there's not much else to go off of. So, I mean, how appealing does this stuff all sound to you guys? Like, do you care about the standard implications? Is that interesting to you? Like, Jumpstart 2025, that stands out to me as like some of the more interesting cards. Like, what's the pulse on like the idea behind this set?
Cares about is strong because I will never play another game of Standard again as long as I live, and I know that. Not for any like statement making reasons, but just because I just don't care about Standard, and haven't for a long time. However, when I started playing Hearthstone, which eventually got me back into Magic, there at the time, I don't know how Hearthstone works anymore, but at the time there was like a pool of cards that were constant and were available to every character class. And I thought that was kind of cool to have sort of like a card base. So like I do in theory like the idea that like green always has Land of War Elves or like blue always has Opt or whatever. Mm-hmm. I like that in theory. I like the idea that there's always like a Wrath of God. Because previously like some cycles of Standard it's like, okay, well there isn't like a single decent way for blue-white to manage an out-of-control board, so you just can't really play. Even if there are other good control cards, like Control is missing this baseline tool that it needs a couple copies of to be competitive in any given meta, so you just can't play Control right now. Or Green doesn't have cheap acceleration that doesn't suck, so like you can't really play Green right now. So I do like the idea of the format having bones, so to speak, but I also don't know enough about what's going on in the constructed format or how it's been impacted by the expansion in the number of available sets or whatever to really make a strong commentary on that. That's just my gut level reaction, is that strikes me as potentially positive, but broadly speaking, I don't really care.
Yeah, my understanding of Standard right now is it's basically a bunch of decks trying to kill you on turn 3 versus a bunch of decks trying to grind out the game with Unholy Annex. That is my understanding of Standard. So,
ugh.
That's a very I don't
Yeah,
play
that's what
I
we
don't
got from Worlds.
I don't play standard, but yeah, basically it's like are you draining for 2 a turn with your Phyrexian Arena, or are you wombo killing people with Heartfire Hero on turn 3?
I mean, do you think Spider-Man and Venom is going to be able to hold up with the stuff that's in Foundations, or no? Like, do you think? Anyway, stay tuned for our next episode for more about that. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, normally we have a lot more to say about the structure of the set, but again, not really for us, but we can pull out a bunch of cards here. And we're covering everything. If it's new to Arena, we will cover the reprints. If it's not new to Arena and we've already had it, then we're not going to cover it here. So, for example, like Embercleave is in the special guest slot. We're not going to talk about Embercleave here because everybody played it, including ourselves. But if it is a new to Arena print, but a reprint still, then it made this list. The first card here, actually, the only reason this is actually here is because when I was going through like my portion of cards I wanted to talk about, I was like, oh, we're not going to get that much to talk about here, so let me talk about anything that's like even remotely chattable. So I don't think this card gets there, but it was one of the first cards I put on the list. So if you guys are ready, we'll go ahead and jump into some Magic the Gathering cards here, including everything from Jumpstart and the special guest slot and the standard collection and the main set itself. So I'll do my best to parse out like when it's something from a supplementary set. But let's get into this first one with Arabo, the First Fang, quadrupedal Arabo, for those of you who are used to seeing him stand on 2 legs. It's 2 and a white for a 2/2 rare legendary cat avatar. It says other cats you control get +1/+1, and when Arabo or another non-token cat you control enters, create a 1/1 white cat creature token. So baseline level, this is 3 mana for 2 2/2s. Because it pumps the cat that it makes. I'm going to put 0 stock in the ability to play other cats and make additional cat tokens, but that would be really strong if you could do that. My question was just how good is 2 2/2s for 3 mana? And I think it's decent, if completely unexciting. And Chris has pointed out in our notes, I believe it's Chris, maybe it was Teld, that like they're just more interesting cards at 3, like white 3s.
Yeah, if you're not triggering this a second time, then like just play Blade Splicer.
Or Toby.
Yeah, I think if you don't expect to ever get a second token out of this, also, like, you could attack in combat with your 2/2/2s and then, like, get this shocked, and then the other token is just a 1. Like, I think this is, unless you are doing a tribal something, I think that this is way worse than Blade Splicer. And even though, I can't remember what it's called, there's a 2/4 that was, like, I don't know, they released so many supplemental bullshit products now. It wasn't main set LCI, it was, like, related in some way to LCI.
Oh, the Matter Weaver.
Yeah, the Matter Weaver.
One,
it's
sure.
a 2/4, and I think like every time you cast a creature spell, it makes a 1/1 or something.
Even inside the main set of LCI, to bring up a card, like how many times do you have to trigger this before it's actually better than Sanguine Evangelist? Because you just play Sanguine Evangelist and it's just way better than this.
Yeah. There's a lot better cards than this, though. I do think like if you're doing something catty, like this card obviously just gets there, but then you know you want this card anyway.
Yeah,
so
this is a tribal card, I think.
Yeah, this was a casualty of me just not expecting to get as much from this set as we did. So like, did I need to spend 5 minutes talking about it? Not really, but I did. You guys actually added a lot more than what I had, but next up we've got one that we're going to be talking about in the Peasant Cube, actually raving about in the Peasant Cube, and I'm interested on thoughts here for the mainline cube. Sun Blessed Healer is 1 and a white for a 3/1 uncommon human cleric. It has kicker for 1 and a white. It has a lifelink, and it says when this creature enters, if it was kicked, return a non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield.
Man, uncommons these days.
This card is clearly like one of the best uncommons in the set, and I think this is the only card in the Peasant Cube that I will consider a forever card from this set. But like, talk to me about the mainline cube.
I think it's playable. It's obviously no Intrepid Adversary. I think the big difference also is like Intrepid Adversary can come down late and just kill your opponent because you have enough mana to dump into it to like surprise, all my 1/2s are now 3/4s or whatever. I do like this in theory, but sometimes you're even going to draw it in the late game, I think, and you're not going to have like a particularly strong target for it. But as Teld mentioned, like, Jesus, uncommons these days, pretty nuts.
Yeah.
I think the fact that we're even discussing it is a testament to what a good uncommon it is. I think if I played your unrestricted cube and I saw this in there, I wouldn't have like a strong opinion on that being like a bad choice. They're just a bunch of good white 2s. Now, in relation to our own cube, like, I don't want to get too far down a tangent, but I look at this and I'm like, obviously this is a different card, but like, how does this stack up against something like Resolute reinforcements, where this can theoretically also be 2 bodies, but like in a much better sense. Obviously, very different card.
Yeah, I think if this card's going to see play, I think some of the cards you're going to want to play it in are probably in the Abzan spectrum. So like when I'm thinking about what deck I would want this in, right? It's like bringing back my Jadar, bringing back my Marionette Apprentice, bringing back my Vrain, right? These cards that that reward you for having a big board presence and are oftentimes targets for removal. I could also see, I mean, like Bristly Bill and like Sharp-Eyed Rookie and Tender Wild Guide, Twitching Doll. These are all cards that are like kind of okay to bring back. So I think like those targets, there's a little bit more. Bunny Cord's a pretty good card to bring back. Like I said, I don't know if this card quite gets there because you kind of have to look at this as like a 4-mana card. And at 4 mana, you're looking at cards like Sarah Paragon and Beza as the competition.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's modal and flexible and we're even talking about it for this conversation is just a testament to how much they push uncommon creatures these days.
I think another interesting application for it, and this is a little bit niche, but I know that in some cubes that try to have a strong enchantment theme, some amount of the black removal will be like enchantments that give something -X/-X. And like obviously, like if Deadweight kills something, it goes to the graveyard just like a removal spell. So if you have a number of removal spells that kind of like kill their target and go to the graveyard at the same time, this can effectively be like almost like a Snapcaster Magi type of effect in like your black-white decks, which is niche, but something.
This same style of cube is also probably going to be playing cards like Sterling Grove, which you could bring back with this, as well as like the Pants effects you could bring back with this. So like that's actually a pretty good shout. Where inside of when you really care about non-creature non-land permanents and you're bringing back enchantments or artifacts, I think cards go up a little bit in value because those tend to have really high synergies inside the cubes you want to play them in.
Yeah. So that's actually a very good point. Like, I mean, the removal spells I'm talking about are technically auras, but if you're also playing a cube that has a variety of auras in it that can like die out from under the creature that you put them on or whatever, that increases the density of like decent targets for this. So I think it's a cool little card. I don't know that we'll play it, but I think it's a cool little card, and it probably has some cool applications in a variety of different scenarios. Yeah.
Peasant Cube Slam Dunk, by the way. This card's like Windmill Slam, going in your cube, never coming out type card.
Exactly. Also, they slapped lifelink on this bad boy for no reason. This is great. I guess to make it not a miserable 2-drop to play, but okay, next up we've got one of the Jumpstart reprints, and maybe this is a good/bad time to mention that all of the legendary creatures from Jumpstart have anime art and only anime art, which is something that Teld's a big fan of, but myself and Chris, we're not super into the anime
I don't get an
art,
anime art read off this card, though. That's the strange thing.
It's not... Like, this art's actually not bad for Bramaz at all. And not to say the anime art is bad so much as, like, some of it's super cringy, but...
We are not the target audience for the style of art that they chose. I do actually like this Bramaz art, though. I do think it's quite good.
There must be a target audience out there that's eating this shit.
Yeah, people who own body pillows. I'm just going to come out and say it.
When Bramaz came out in I think it was Born of the Gods, like this card was so fucking cool too. Bramaz King of Oreskos is a reprint. It's 1 white for a 3/4 legendary cat soldier. It has vigilance. When it attacks, create a 1/1 cat soldier with vigilance that's attacking, and when it blocks, create a 1/1 cat soldier with vigilance that's blocking the creature that Bramaz blocked. And we might as well just mention this in tandem with another reprint, which is Adeline. You guys know Adeline. It's the star 4 that has power equal to the number of creatures you control, and whenever you attack, you get a 1/1 attack in each opponent.
Yeah, it's the 3-mana 8/4.
Yeah, it's insane because everybody knows Adeline is power crept Bramaz. The mana cost is exactly the same, but like Adeline ends up being like a 7/4, whereas Bramaz is a 3/4, and it's hilarious because Bramaz has the mythic rare symbol on it, but Adeline is just like a
very
rare
weird,
and like that's clearly not how that's supposed to be. Bramaz does not. Bramaz actually might hold up in Modern Magic, but like if you're going for power max, and you would just play Adeline, so maybe as like bump down Adeline. We don't play Adeline ourselves because of the snowballing nature of the card, so maybe if we wanted Adeline at home, which is sad to say about Bramaz, we could consider this card instead, but it hasn't really held up.
Bramaz is a marginally better defensive card, right? Because the token has vigilance, and you get a token when you block with Bramaz. So it does have an edge in that one little spot, but 90% of the time, Adeline is better.
It's really funny because I remember when Adeline came out, I keep bringing up this podcast, and that shall not be named, but like I had a bunch of bad opinions because they had a podcast that they had opinions that maybe didn't hold up now that I have a little bit more expertise, but I was like, they have to be right. They have a podcast. And they were talking about how Brimaz was a bad card, which I don't agree with, and that Adeline was also bad because it was basically Brimaz that wasn't as good on defense. And both of those takes were both terrible.
I was gonna say you've never played Adeline without saying you've never played Adeline.
Yeah, really. This was the same podcast that like reviewed Nissa Who Shakes the World when it came out and said it was a bad card. So my take on Brimaz is that if you think Adeline is too obnoxiously powerful, like if you're trying to sort of mitigate that, but you want a simple effect, I think this probably still holds up fine. When I read Brimaz, I think like, wow, this creature must have been insane for its time.
Shockingly, wasn't actually nearly as good as people thought it was going to be.
Really?
It didn't like define standard. I don't even remember it seeing much standard play. I'm sure it did, but it wasn't like a defining card of the era or anything like that.
Well, I mean, I can totally believe that. I think Brimaz is still decent.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, Cat Soldier, go back to our Erebos for a second. Like, maybe we can get the cat thing going. Jank Diver Gaming Cube 2025, all cats and dogs.
They did reprint Regal Caracal in this set, I think.
Okay, well, hold on a minute. Which I'm sure we played. I think we played that in the original version of the mainline cube, because it's just like, oh, it's a 5-drop that makes a bunch of bodies. And it's like, yeah,
it was good enough for the time. That's what we had at the time.
Yeah. Last white creature to talk about here. Interesting one, I think. Sky Knight Squire is 1 and a white for a 1/1 cat. It's a cat. It's a cat scout. All right, hold on a minute.
Oops, all cats. Let's go.
Whenever another creature you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on this card. So it's got kind of like the Thalia Lieutenant vibe there. As long as this creature has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, it has flying and is a knight in addition to its other type. So talk to me about this one. I think this card is very interesting, but probably like a not for us style card.
I hate this card.
I put this up here because if your 2-mana creature eventually becomes a 4/4 flyer, that's obviously a very good deal. I also happen to like the art. Typically these days, and maybe it's just like the expectation I've developed from how many green creatures that do similar things now, and we're even going to talk about one more later. It's like they seized on this design concept and can't get off of it. But usually these days these effects like start as a bear. It's probably not a good top deck.
Well, it's obviously
it's not a good top deck. On 2, I think that this eventually becomes like a 2-drop that has to be removed, but there are a bunch of 2-drops these days that have to be removed. So I put it up here because I think like it's a card that you could consider if you want to like explicitly promote like token strategies and stuff. I think that it's fine. It's not exciting.
This kind of feels like a Regal Bunnycorn that requires a lot more work and be played on curve. I really don't like the design of cards like this because they're just completely obnoxious if you play them on turn 2. And then if you top deck it late into the game without, an Elspeth Sun's Champion in play or something, you top decked a 1/1 for 2 mana and it doesn't impact the board at all. So overall, just not a fan of the design at all. It's probably a fine enough card if you're into super curvy kind of gameplay, but I think there are better cards, like I mentioned, cards like Bunnycorn or Intrepid Adversary that are totally fine threats on 2 that scale much better into the game.
Yeah, looks like a good part of a reasonable part of a good glass cannon curve out, right? Where if your opponent picks off any part of your curve, your deck probably doesn't get there. But if you're just allowed to curve 1, 2, 3, 4, you're just like stomp. Good in the same kind of decks where Warden of the Sky is probably theoretically good, though I think that card's been a little bit of an underperformer in the structure of our own cube as well. So there's actually only one spell to talk about here. It's Condemn with a mythic rare symbol, which is insulting, but whatever. Condemn is a reprint. It's one of the special guests here. It's got Quintorius art on it. Actually, that might just be an elephant. Actually, that's just a black and white elephant. That's not Quintorius.
We're going with Quintorius, even though it's not.
Yeah, it's Quintorius. White mana for an instant. Put target attacking creature on the bottom of its owner's library. Its controller gains life equal to its toughness. My read of this is that this card still shows up in Vintage Cube sometimes. I don't know how much it holds up in Vintage Cube. It's just worse than Elspeth's Smite, or is there like is it better than Elspeth's Smite enough that like you think it's just better than Elspeth's Smite?
It's like I think it's obviously better. Like, but is there an argument to Elspeth's Smite being comparable to this?
Yeah, Elspeth's Smite works when you're attacking your opponent sometimes. I mean, like as a defensive measure.
Sure, I guess that I'm not putting Elspeth's Smite in my deck that's attacking either, though. So that's probably where I'm thinking is like when I think of Elspeth's Smite, your opponent has to be attacking you anyways.
I think it's contextual. Like, I like Condemn better as an effect because it has a broader range of targets, but it's It's not that it's necessarily less punishing to aggressive decks because they don't really care about the life as much, but like when Elspeth's Smite is consistently hitting the targets that you want it to hit in a controlling deck, I think Condemn is a better overall card.
It probably is.
Aclazotz, Hazoret, Balustrade Worm, like those targets alone are probably enough that you're supposed to prefer this. The fact that it kills like 4 and 5 drops and stuff. Now, whether you want that in your cube is another question because I don't think this is nearly as good as Swords to Plowshares, obviously. Like that,
No.
It's obviously way worse, like in every way. But if you're concerned about like your control decks being able to kill 4 and 5, 6 mana cards for 1 mana, this is very, very good in blue-white.
This feels like fixed Swords to Plowshares for me. For obvious reasons. Like Swords is one of those things that in your aggressive deck you can just like dump a bunch of stuff onto the board and leave up 1 mana, and then your opponent, like on their turn, plays like a 5-drop, and then you just boom, and then you untap, and then you attack. Like, this is something I would feel comfortable testing in the cube. I don't think we're ever going to put Swords back in the cube, would be my guess. Speaking of which, like, I've enjoyed Path. Like, Path has felt efficient, but like punishing if you're forced to use it in a situation where you don't want it to. But
notably, this wasn't uncommon the first time we saw it. I don't know why we needed to
this. Yeah, no, I mean, you know why they need. You know why they needed an upshift. You know.
Yeah,
why.
one of the few disadvantages of playing on Arena versus playing in paper is that a card like this you have to charge someone a mythic wild card for, which is garbage. Goblin Bushwhacker is also in the set as a mythic rare. Paradise Druid is a mythic rare in the set. It's just like, whatever.
Yeah, the flip side of that, though, is like we literally play enough Magic that we have a podcast like dedicated to it, and I have spent $0.00 on Magic in like the last 6 months.
Yeah.
So,
But to the one listener who's like, man, what they're talking about sounds really cool. I'd like to come play with them. And then it's like, oh, you need mythic wild cards to craft your Condemn. Sorry.
It is unfortunate.
It's a bummer for them.
It is a bummer. I will say, though, in response to that, for anybody who's maybe listening to this and considering coming out and playing with us, if you are a really dedicated limited player and you don't play a lot of constructed, you probably have wild cards like coming out of your butthole. So,
and if you're not a dedicated limited player and you'd like to get better, we have a lot of grinders and people love to sit in chat and sit there and draft with you.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yep.
You got your own. You'll have your own little crew. They'll just, of course, you'll have to deal with 3 people yelling at you about taking cards and what the play is. But you will be able to have that assistance if you need it.
Yep. White effects that aren't instants and sorceries. So the first one's interesting. This is Celestial Armor. 2 and a white for rare equipment. It has flash, because everything in Magic has flash these days. When it enters, attach it to target creature you control. That creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. The equipped creature gets +2/+0 in flying, just as a static, and then the equip cost is 3 and a white. So pretty hefty equip cost, but I mean, the immediate comparison is Maul of the Skyclaves, right? Which is 3 mana, sorcery speed equipment, auto attaches, gives +2/+2 flying, first strike, also has an equip cost of 4. This is going to operate, I think, very similarly to Maul of the Skyclaves, except it's also going to blank a removal spell sometimes, which means, like, there's a defensive measure to it where, like, sometimes you hold your mana up and it's like, am I supposed to just run this out? But like when this catches somebody's removal spell and then auto attaches, it's just brutal.
Yeah, and also like sometimes if they're tapped out and they go for a block, you'll get they wouldn't have the option with Maul, so it pushes more damage, but you can like take a good trade to win a race that way. Yeah, this card seems like generally an upgrade. Like Maul definitely has some edges where the first strike comes into play on your creature, or like the +2 toughness comes into play. But I think in most cases, I think this card is going to be enough better and more interesting in a way that just adds another card to the Stoneforge toolbox too.
It is a different card. Like I've definitely won games because I was able to slap Maul on like a vigilance creature, and the first strike made it just impossible for my opponent to win. But I think that this is generally a more interesting effect because it has combat trick vibes to it as well. So I'm down to try this instead of Maul. We've been playing Maul on and off for a really long time.
I don't know. I'm like not a huge fan of the proliferation of putting flash on like everything, and like you said, this one has to have flash because of the protection mode, but like the design itself, I'm just tired of seeing stuff like this because it's the type of thing where like, oh, you're behind, you have to aim your removal spell, they have this, so not only did you not kill their thing, but you're in a worse position than you were like post-combat trick, so or pre-combat trick. So I mean, it's obviously a strong card. I'm tired of seeing flash on everything. It just makes, I don't know. Anyway, card's good. We'll probably, I mean, do you think it coexists with Maul of the Skyclaves or just has to replace it? Like, there's probably not room for 2 equipment like this, right?
I think it depends on your goals and your cube size, but yeah, I think we would only play 1.
I actually think there's another card that sort of does, Chris pointed out, it kind of does the Maul thing pretty well. And I think this is probably replacing Maul, but if we want another effect, I think the card we're going to talk about here in a minute is
let's just talk. Let's just talk about it real quick. So you're talking about Angelic Destiny, which is a reprint from some older core set. 2 white for an aura. Enchanted creature gets +4/+4 flying and first strike and is an angel in addition to its other types. And when the enchanted creature dies, you get this aura back. Angelic Destiny goes back to your hand. So this one has like the huge like aura risk of like if your creature gets sniped out from underneath it, like it doesn't do anything and you don't get the aura back. But if you land it, like you're getting a pretty strong hit in, if not like just a lethal hit, and then they're forced to kill that creature, you then get this back and you get to kind of like play the whole rigmarole over and over again. So this one's more about like sticking it the first time than it is about like holding it up at the right moment or whatever.
Which I think is kind of Maul's thing too. Like if you ever get blown out when you go to equip your Maul, it feels pretty brutal as well. This one's obviously a little bit worse because you spent more mana and you don't get it back. But I will say, unlike Brimaz, we talked about that card not really having any sort of constructed waves. This was one of the defining cards of Standard for its entire lifespan, if I remember correctly. It was a very, very powerful finisher for white aggressive decks.
Was right before my time. I think this was like maybe M14 or something like that. But this is kind of the classic. Like I know they've really retrained how they handle auras these days. They usually do a lot more cantrip or give you some sort of value if like the creature gets out. This is like the typical like don't play auras trap that people talk about, where it's like you just get you lose the game if your creature gets sniped out in response to it. Do you think this card has a home like in our cube? Like would you play this in our cube?
I would play this in just off the cuff without having actually played it in our cube. I think I would play this in every white aggressive deck that I ever draft. Like, I think I would. This card is, there's the aura risk, but your opponent can't hold up mana all the time, especially when you're curving out on them. They have to tap out at some point to play their cards to the board in most cases. Like, the obviously Dies to Doomblade argument we've hashed out as to why that's not 100% accurate. And when you're applying a bunch of pressure with your 1-2-3 curve, and then you slap this on something, particularly when you slap this on like your Thraben Inspector or something like that, where it's like a 1-drop that already got value, or it's a card that your opponent didn't want to point a removal spell at, it just opens up so many more attacks for you. And the damage, this is 4/4 flying is quite the push. Your opponent's not going to be able to block that basically ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and I think relative to Maul, I think I like this better against green decks that are obviously less likely than other colors to snipe the creature out from under it, and B, like green has access to a lot of huge reach creatures these days, and occasionally that extra +2/+2 is going to be the difference between being able to attack through that Vorinclex, and not being able to attack through that Vorinclex. So I think we'd play it. I mean, it's just another option. Maul being a Stoneforge target probably pushes it up in my estimation for me. If you're putting Stoneforge in your cube, I think the answer is obvious, but...
Well, we just play Heliod's Pilgrim in addition to Stoneforge, so you can fetch auras and equipment.
Yeah,
nice.
I think what I would argue to do is replace Maul with the Celestial Armor and then potentially find a cut for this, because I do think this serves a different purpose. I think the Celestial Armor is like a mid-rangey kind of card, whereas this is very much your curve out white aggro. This is my 4-drop that like lets me win the game.
Yeah, I am skeptical of 4-mana aura. Like, obviously, I'm skeptical of that.
Sure. Yeah.
There will also, like, for every green matchup where this just, like, stomps them, there's going to be, like, a matchup where your opponent does just hold up interaction, and this is a card you're in your hand that's in your hand, and you're like, I can never resolve this game. So, like, this is probably matchup dependent. I do think if we were to, like, find spot in our cube, this would have to be the type of card where the cube designers have to prove that it's good, because I could see a lot of people like myself being skeptical of taking an aura and not playing it until they see that, like, oh, this card just, like, closes out the game in 2 turns or whatever.
I'm not crazy about Destiny for sort of the reasons you just outlined. Like, I think on one end against certain decks, for the extra mana, it's just the extra size is way better than Maul, right? Like, well, what the fuck am I supposed to do? Like, okay, you put that on a creature with, like, 3 toughness, and, like, I can't beat it now. Versus, like, if your Maul gets blown out, it sucks to re-equip it, but you can. So my gut is that somebody's going to lose to Angelic Destiny, and they're going to be really pissed because they're going to be like, okay, I have a 6/6 reach creature that can't block your like 3-drop that you slap this on.
This is certainly more
polar to me.
I was going to say, to use our favorite word, it's certainly more polar.
It's more polar.
All right, polar count. I'll go ahead and get the little sound effect going every time polar comes up. Last white card. This one's pretty simple. This is from Battle for Zendikar, I think. Stasis Snare is 1 white for an enchantment with flash. When it enters, exile a creature an opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. Oh, I forgot to mention at the top of the video, did you guys notice that the enchantment frame has changed? They made all enchantments
So
have kind of like the Theros enchantment creature frame.
No, that's
which I
cool.
think is nice. I kind of like that touch, but 3 mana flash, kind of hard to cast, like Banish and Light type card. Only hits creatures. But you're obviously paying the extra white here for the instant speed interaction. This is fine. It's maybe, I don't want to say power creep necessarily, because I think this is still fine for what it does. But like there's certainly like ossifications and things like that are taking things out for much cheaper these days. So I'm not sure where you guys think Stasis Snare lands, but it is a good shout here. It's a fine guard.
Yeah, I don't want to play this in our cube. I just wanted to throw it out there. I mean, we'll talk about more in the Peasant episode because I think it's more relevant there. But just having access to this card, you know, in your lower power blue-white control decks where you've got access to, you know, hold up counter magic, and now you can hold up your removal spell along with it. You know, it does have a little bit of play there that ossification doesn't. Sometimes, you know, you have to make the decision between killing something and like holding up your counter magic. So probably power crept in the context of our cube, just because we get such efficient cards these days. But it is good to have on the client. I like it because we like to have access to a wide variety of power banded options, and this is just one of them.
Yeah, this was a big standard card of its time, if I remember correctly. It was kind of like the next evolution of Oblivion Ring. So yeah, white's got a couple things going on, enough to kind of reshape your cube around auras and cats, I think is the takeaway there.
Yeah.
Blue actually doesn't have quite as much in the effect department. I was actually really, I mean, I know you guys were too, but I was hoping they would reprint like, or print a new cantrip, because they had to put a cantrip in this set for the whole like standard, you know, backbone thing. But the cantrip we ended up getting was Opt, which is the one that I guessed we would get, whereas other people were hopeful we'd get like Preordained Ponder, and it's like, no fucking way they're going to do that for 5 years.
Probably not.
I really wanted Thought Scour personally. That's the one, more than anything, Thought Scour is the number one cantrip I want at this point because there's so many random synergies with it, and I just really want that card on my client.
I do too. I understand why they went with Opt though, because I think if you are in an environment or context or whatever that doesn't take advantage of putting extra cards in your graveyard, Opt is just 10 times better than Thought Scour. So it makes sense to me that in kind of the vanilla, like this is always going to be accessible for standard, that they went with Opt.
It's also just safe. Like, I don't know, like even if it was Consider or something like that, or Thought Scour, like then like it's like, oh, we have this graveyard set coming up in 2 years. Like, is it okay to have Consider, like that sort of implication? Opt is just like the safe, easy cantrip that they could have put in the set. But the point of that being that we didn't really get any spells from this set that are super interesting. We did get a number of creatures worth talking about. We've got, first up, Mischievous Mystic, which is 1 and a blue for a 2/1 uncommon human wizard. Another one we'll be talking about in the Peasant review. This has flying, and when you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 blue fairy creature token with flying. So I wouldn't have really batted an eyelash at this, I think, if we hadn't already gotten Emrakul's Messenger in MH3 and seen that card perform very, very well. Emrakul's Messenger being the 2/1 that makes a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn when you draw your second card each turn. So, like, the fact that that card has been interesting and cool and sweet in the mainline cube, let alone the Peasant cube, leads me to believe that, like, this card is just good enough. And then the question becomes, if you're doing the thing, would you rather have 1/1 flyers, or would you rather have those little 0/1 ramp creatures? And, like, the default answer is 1/1 flyers, right? Like, you're just adding power to the board. But I will say, just my piece on the card, and I think the 1/1 flyers are generally better. Like, let's say 80% of the time, it's better to have a 1/1 flyer than the little spawn. The 20%ers blue, when blue gets mana ramp, it does some really strong things. Like, just casting, I've mentioned this before, and it was kind of my defense of Emrakul's Messenger in the first place, but when you cast your Intrude the Mind or your Torrential Gearhulk or your Sublime Epiphany a turn early, you often win the game. Like, that's how good given blue ramp is you often win the game by casting a card like that a turn ahead of schedule.
Or when you have the mana to like double spell on your Time Warp turn.
That's what I either that or like if you Emrakul's Messenger, untap, attack, chart a course, trigger it, and you can still hold up a counter spell. Like, that's really powerful.
Yep. That being said, it's probably better to have the 1/1 flyers in most cases, right? It makes it fit into aggressive decks better as well. Like you're kind of like blue red. Is it tempo-y style decks with a bunch of cantrips and things like that? So I don't see a world where we play both of those cards, though it does kind of like start to open up like interest in archetypes. If we start to see more of this down the line, like blue token makers that key off of drawing cards. That said, like this probably supplants Messenger, right?
I think I would say that Messenger probably makes it still in the 450 where you wouldn't mind having two of these. But I think for the 360, I have to imagine this is better. I mean, it just puts so much more of a clock on the game. And it lets you really leverage your card draw in an aggressive way as well as a defensive way. It's one of, so like, this seems quite good to me. This seems very good to me. I mean, especially if you like, you just play this on turn 3, you play a cantrip, you could have triggered your Ledger Shredder, but instead you got to make a token out of it, and that's way better. So, it's already better than Ledger Shredder. Not hard to do, but we're here.
It just had to get your lick in there.
Okay, I am going to throw this out there.
At least once per episode.
This is a debate for us to have off air, but this is a card that I've had in my back pocket for a really long time, and if we've all come around on the idea that like generating some kind of value when you draw your second card each turn is valuable because we've seen that it's not that difficult to do it on Messenger. Another card that's like similar to this is Fairy Vandal, but Fairy Vandal also has Flash.
No, the problem with Fairy Vandal is that our drafters just don't see it as a card. Like, I agree with you, Chris, because we've played it before. I think we've even proven under multiple circumstances that it can be a good card, but the drafters just don't see it, so they're not going to take it. Like,
yeah, and I mean, I'm sympathetic to that.
The problem with Fairy Vandal is that until you trigger it the first time, it does literally nothing. I mean, it's a 1/2 that's not a real card. And I'm not saying a 2/1 is good, but a 2/1 does kill your opponent in 10 swings, right? Like you
2
do
power
have a
flying
real
for 2 is not like you don't feel like you got ripped off. Like it's still
right.
clocking,
Yeah, you're not happy
right?
about it until you've triggered it once, but you're just like, okay, whatever. This is my card. Let's go. But yeah, Fairy Vandal just needs so much more work, I think, to actually be a real card. You need to trigger it twice before you're happy to have it in your deck.
Sure. Let's not go down the off foundations rabbit hole here.
Mystic seems good. A lot of the better blue 2-drop creatures that they've been printing for years loot, and it turns out that when you just have a bunch of cards that loot because they're good cards that just happen to loot, drawing your second card each turn is easier than you might think it is. If you don't play Malcolm and JVP and stuff like that in your cube, and basically the only way that you're drawing extra cards is to cantrip, then maybe this isn't as interesting. But in our experience with the blue creatures that we've chosen to play because we think that they're the best, there are actually a lot of ways to see 2 cards on any given turn.
I will say the art's a definite downgrade from Miracle's Messenger, though.
100%.
Yeah, we like Spaghetti Mommy. It's also, I mean, this is a core set card, power creep, and a Modern Horizons 3 card. I know it's not a strict upgrade, but
yeah, I was about to say
this is the foundations of the future. It's gonna be all power creep all the time.
Next up, this is actually one of the coolest cards in the set. I don't know where it lands in terms of like power and playability, but this is just a really neat design. So we have Drake Hatcher, which sounds like a 90s rapper, but one in a blue for a 1/3 human wizard. It has vigilance and prowess. We've seen that on Kitsa. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, put that many incubation counters on it. Remove 3 incubation counters to make a 2/2 Drake with flying. So this is just a sweet design. First off, the vigilance prowess thing is good. We've seen that be good with Kitsa. Kitsa has some other upside that's been relevant as well, which is completely different upside than what this is doing. So I don't think they're like 1-to-1 comparable or like, oh, this has to replace Kitsa or anything like that. But the idea here is like you attack, your opponent can't really block because of the whole like prowess trick. And then you rattle off some spells, you get some incubation counters. Maybe you do that over the course of 2 turns instead of all at once in 1 turn. And then like you get to just spit out a free 2/2. So every 3 damage that this card does, you get a 2/2 flyer, which is kind of neat. It's just kind of neat. I did want to mention this because it's just it's kind of a novel design. This isn't like comparable to any other card we really have, I don't think.
So I've thought about this card some more, and I do think the design is cool. You can obviously like bluff mid-combat spelling in order to get it through in situations where it wouldn't ordinarily, but I think you're probably only best equipped to do that in an Izzet deck specifically. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, this getting through 3 times before it can make a 2/2 is like a lot to ask. Especially if you draw it later and you like attack into your opponent's like 6/6 with this, and they're like, okay, cool, like show it to me. I am gonna block it. Like I'm gonna make you show me that you can do this. So I am currently on, I think it is a lot weaker than Kitsa, and I'm not even taking into account Kitsa's like copy whatever. I don't think that's what Kitsa's supposed to be doing. I think Kitsa's supposed to poke in for damage when it shouldn't be able to get in, defend well, and then it's like fixing your hand every turn. I think that's a lot better than this. I do like this design, but the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, it getting through 3 times is like quite a number of times.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, because I think this card is nifty. I do agree the design is neat. I think this card's terrible though. This card's garbage.
No, it's not garbage, but it's certainly not better than other twos.
If you got a Monstrous Rage on
Vigilance Prowess 1/3.
If you've got Monstrous Rage on turn 3, I think it's fine. But like, I do not think this card is good at all. Like, you're never getting through for any real amount of damage with it. The Kitsa doesn't even chip through damage that often. It does, but it doesn't chip through damage super often after like turn 2. And you're not triggering this without Monstrous Rage more like on turn 3, right? You're gonna have to hit them twice with it, almost certainly. And that's just not going to happen, I think, in most games. And in the games where like maybe you could do that to your opponent, they're just going to kill it. And like, obviously, I know Dice of Doomblade is not a real argument. We've talked about this before.
Especially on 2-drops. Like, who cares?
Especially
You're
on
trading
2-drops,
card
right.
to card on tempo.
Yeah. But I think most of the time this card's just going to get chump blocked pretty quickly. Maybe I'm wrong. I'd actually be happy if I'm wrong because I think the design's really cool. But I think this card's really bad.
I think garbage and really bad is stretching because I think the Vigilance Prowess 2-drop is like a fine stat. Like, that's not enough to put the card in the queue, but like Kitsa being like my new favorite card in the mainline cube, I found like you can just like I think garbage is like too low on it, but
maybe
I think we're all share the idea that like the card is cooler than it is like inherently powerful.
Sure.
Like, obviously,
I guess I think about it if like Kitsa didn't have the looting effect on it, I would have zero interest in it, and this doesn't have the looting, so I have zero interest in it.
They hooked Kitsa up.
They really did.
Yeah, Kitsa having free looting on it on top of like being like a dream already. It was just kind of a selling point. Like, I don't see Kitsa going in.
Quick side note on this one. This is a little niche, but like if you have a proliferate theme in your cube, or specifically in blue, this gets more interesting if you have ways to like capitalize on getting even just one counter on it.
Yeah, to be clear, if you've got like Monstrous Rage, Prophesidetic Memory, cards that buff this creature, where it's like now actually able to rumble in combat, and you're not just relying on, casting a cantrip and making it a 2/4, I think this card goes way up. I think if you're playing any sort of pants or anything like that, this card could be great.
This into doubling season, we broke it.
So like when I say it's garbage, I mean or I don't think it's good. I think it's not good in the context of like you're just playing a regular cube where your blue deck is mostly playing like a couple of card draw spells and like a removal spell or something.
I'm gonna be honest. With our cube in particular being as powerful as it is now, I wish Modern Magic was more amenable to cards like this, because I think this is a really cool design that's not going to see play because there's just more powerful options.
Well, and this is kind of funny. It's sort of a testament to something we were talking about earlier, because this is a mix of like modern prints at modern power level and reprints. There's kind of a weird disparity in the power level of like. There are a lot of cards in the set that feel appropriate for like what the idea of the set is, and then there's a bunch of cards in it that I'm just like, this is just a really, really powerful Modern Magic card.
You mean like when they power crept a good Modern Horizons 3 card?
Yeah. Or like Savannah Lions is in the set, but then so is Adeline. So
Savannah Lions is definitely in the set. Well, Adeline's and Jumpstart. So
fair play.
They'll never see play together. But that actually dovetails perfectly into Venser here,
job,
which
Chris.
we spent a little bit of time before the podcast talking about Jace the Mind Sculptor and kind of lamenting like, where that card is at versus where it used to be. Like, it's very clear, even if you think it's like functional and fine, that it's not like a top tier blue card. And that's kind of what's going on with Venser as well. It used to be a legacy staple, vintage cube staple rather. Anyway, Venser Shaper Savant, 2 blue for a 2/2 rare legendary creature. It's a human wizard. It has flash, and when it enters, you return a spell or permanent to its owner's hand. A couple of things real quick. First off, like that can bounce spells off the stack, and it can also target lands. So it's a little bit more flexible than the Talion's Throne Guard that we've been playing, which is an alchemy card that's basically a 2/1 fly-in version of Venser without, getting super into it. And that card isn't like impressive either. It's just like fine in certain styles of decks. Venser's also double blue. It's a 2/2, so it's not added much to the board. It does not have flying. The whole bounce and land thing is actually like kind of just annoying upside more than it is like something we actively want, like an upgrade to Talon Throw Guard. So I don't know. I really, of the anime arts, this is one of the cooler ones.
Easily.
And the card has like some nostalgia factor to it, but I don't see a world where Venser gets there unless Talion's Throne Guard was like super impressive.
I will say,
but it's just not.
I actually think, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but we've talked about this before with stuff like Tree 3 Battalion, where I think if we put this in instead of Talion's Throne Guard, this would see more play despite being worse.
Yeah.
At least in the short term, because people like they don't have that nostalgia or that understanding implicitly of like what Talion's Throne Guard does, so you have to read it, and when you're in a pack you just don't bother. Whereas Venser, like, everybody knows what it does, it's got the pedigree to it, even though I don't think it's very good anymore. I think more people would play that card despite it being a worse card.
I agree. First of all, I'm just going to be a dick for a second and say the reason that this is one of the cooler anime arts is because it's not an anime art that's like reminiscent of a cartoon that someone would watch about how hard it is to be in high school in Japan. This is like actually cool. This is cool anime art. But yeah, I'm with you on Venser. Like, we talked about this when Throne Guard came out. A 2/2 grounder is not a valuable body anymore. It's just really not. And the only upside is that it can disrupt your opponent's lands, which from my perspective, from a gameplay perspective, is not a good thing. And then to boot, like, if you go like Soul Herder into Venser, you can just start flickering it and just like bouncing all your opponent's lands back to their hand, and that sucks. That's just dog shit gameplay. So it's a bummer, because I actually think that this Venser art's really sick, but like I don't think the thing that Venser can do better than the Throne Guard can do is good for gameplay, and the reason that Throne Guard is playable is because it flies. Like, you get to disrupt something, and now you have a vase of power. I still like Throne Guard better than you guys do, but it's not like a must-play card, and I think that Venser, in the average case, is weaker, and in the thing that it can do that Throne Guard can't do, I think that's obnoxious. So
I don't have any strong opinions on Throne Guard. I think I've seen it be fine, and I think it's fine.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I'm saying. It's fine. It's a fine card.
It gets played in decks that it should be played in often, which Venser would too. But is this a Chris plant here? The Sphinx of Forgotten Lore?
It is. I was kind of surprised to see that this didn't get put on the document. So I'm going to go ahead and read it.
I didn't put it on the document because I knew you were going to put it on the document.
Oh, fair play. Okay, so first of all, this art is fucking sick. I mean, the posture on the Sphinx is impeccable, truly cat-like.
He's been hitting the gym.
He's been hitting the gym, yeah, and doing his yoga at the same time. Mobility is as important as strength, people.
And that plumage, am I right?
And the plumage, yes. I kind of, wow. I'm not into beards, but, I kind of want to climb that one. Sphinx of Forgotten Lore is 2 blue for a mythic creature Sphinx. It is a 3/3 with flash and flying. So baseline creature, 4 mana, 3/3 flash flyer. Not super exciting, but solid. And then whenever it attacks, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to that card's mana cost. I think this is pretty good. I don't think it's like a slam. It is obviously, while this is a very different card, it is obviously not nearly as strong as the other Sphinx that shall not be named, that kills your opponent in 3 turns and has hexproof. But I actually think that this card is really interesting. Obviously, like, you're not flashing back counter spells, so if you're an extremely reactive blue deck that's just like stacked full of counter spells, this might not offer you a whole lot of utility, but I think that a 3/3 flash flyer for 4 that can clock your opponent while simultaneously like recurring your cantrips or lightning bolts or doom blades or whatever you need in that moment out of your graveyard, I think is a card worth talking about. I don't think that this is like an A+, like, why wasn't this on the document originally, but I think this is a pretty solid blue creature.
It's a cool test card, at the very least. I could see a world where this is cool.
Yeah, I like the design of it, but I think the problem is that the reason you want to hold up all your mana on your opponent's turn is to be able to use counter magic, and now you're having to do that, but now this card wants you to spend your mana on your turn. You're never getting away with anything with it. Like, you get good value if you attack with it multiple times, but it's not really trading with anything in combat. It's not difficult to interact with. It's a 4-drop that dies to lightning bolt. I'm cool trying this, I guess, but I don't. If this didn't have flash, obviously it'd be unplayable, but
it'd be
I think
terrible.
even with flash, I'm just not. What we saw with the Sphinx that shall not be named is that it didn't really matter that it cost your entire turn because you just played it and it just killed your opponent in 3 swings. And what we've seen with Enduring Curiosity is that most of the time you're playing it as kind of like a ambush Viper that then sticks around and lets you draw some cards later down the road.
Really good.
This card doesn't do either of those things, and that has me a little concerned. You've got to be able to spend 4 mana, get it into play, and then have something already cast in your graveyard that you can get back with it for value. It's a little bit setup. I mean, I'm assuming if you're playing a spells heavy blue deck, you're probably gonna have something in your graveyard by turn 4. Like you've interacted with your opponent on turn 2 or 3. I'm just not convinced that this is actually good, but it is a cool card. I like the design.
I think it's best home, and this is not necessarily like a vote of confidence for it because like there are a bunch of cards that fall into this category already. But I think it's probably at its best in Is It, right? When you're just going to have like bolts and cantrips and stuff to just do with it, and it's like double triggering your prowess shit every turn and that type of stuff. The other thing that is potentially a concern is that between Dig Through Time, Gear Hulk, Snapcaster Mage, and we recently decided to try out Abhorrent Oculus, that maybe there's just a little too much competition for exiling shit out of your graveyard. But I think we just discussed, like, we're all kind of tepid on Throne Guard. I think that we have a spot to like try it and see what it does at the very least.
Yeah, I will say I think Throne Guard's better than this for what it's worth.
Huh.
Like they probably go in different decks, and I'm fine to try out the new card. I'm just saying, like, you know, I think Throne Guard is probably better once we test them.
I could see that. They're obviously very different cards, but like Throne Guard being disruptive while creating pressure is a thing, and to your point, this being like a 3/3 flash flyer means it's not like it's like going to come in and eat a 3-drop on defense, you know. Putting a 4th point of toughness on this might have been kind of insane, though, for that very reason. Because, you know, if you flash it in and eat a 3-drop and then, like, attack and recur your Doomblade, like, that's sort of nuts.
Yeah, with the way they design cards in this set, I'm actually surprised this isn't a 3/2. That way it would be another 4-drop that died to Burst Lightning at 1 mana.
I don't have a strong opinion about it, but this is the type of card that I could see lines with it to the point where I'm like, okay, we should try this out. I think it is partly the art is cool, but the effect has potential, like in that kind of Grixis-y, control-y spells segment. There was a card, I think it's called Backdraft Dragon or something like that, Backdraft Hellkite, which was like a 5-mana 4/4 dragon with the same exact ability, and that card proved to be like too slow and clunky as a 5-drop sorcery speed creature. I do think shaving a mana off of it and, you know, letting you cast that instant speed does change it a little bit. I could see a world where like you play blue-black with a bunch of Doom Blades and you manage to sneak this in and cast basically a free Doom Blade from your graveyard the next turn. Well, you pay the mana for it, but you get an extra card out of it. So I think we try this card out. I am amenable to Teld's like hesitation on it, given the stat line and like the type of decks that might want it. But I think this is a perfectly fine card to try out, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Last blue card, Time Warp number 2. We're not going to play Time Warp number 2, but Temporal Manipulation is reprinted here as a special guest slot. 2 blue sorcery, take an extra turn after this one. It's just Time Warp number 2 if you're interested in that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I can't imagine it's healthy for a cube like ours to have a second Time Warp, given what the first Time Warp does sometimes. But maybe Timeless Cube or people who are just like absolutely trying to power max arena cubes as much as possible.
Double Time Warps and
will be
Timeless seems good. At 450, we could maybe do this as well, just to make sure that there's... It's kind of funny how, like, when we first put Time Warp in here, it was, like, radically overestimated because of its historical pedigree, but there really weren't enough ways to abuse it for it to actually be a top-tier blue card. And then over time, it just became a top-tier blue card because the context of the cube around it changed.
Well, yeah, I mean, we talked about this, right? When your blue deck could never get ahead on board, then Time Warp was just a really expensive explore. But now that you have the combination of like cheap creatures that allow you to get ahead on board, and also the Wombo combo with Quintorius, it just has a lot of legs now.
Yeah. Svalin, your turn 3 play isn't good enough to stop my Svalin because you're setting up for something. I untap, Dismiss, or Cryptic Command for those of you at home who don't play Dismiss, your next thing, and then I untap and Time Warp. It's pretty good.
Yeah. So not healthy for us. We're not going to include a second Time Warp by any means, but probably relevant for the card pool. That moves us into black, where I'm going to... Oh, Jesus Christ, black has a lot of creatures to talk about. I didn't realize there were that many. Chris, do you want to handle like reading out some of the black creatures here?
Yeah, sure. So here's a card that I think is better than Teld thinks it is. Vampire Gourmand, 1 in a black, 2/2. Whenever this creature attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, draw a card, and this creature can't be blocked this turn. I kind of see this in a weird way, and it's roundabout, but in a weird way, I see this as a Blood Artist effect and a sacrifice outlet on the same card that you can also just like trade off. If you're on the back foot, you just want to trade off for your opponent's aggressive creature. Basically, every time you put a piece of crap on the board, you can sack it to draw a card and deal 2 damage to your opponent, and if you can't do that, you can just trade this off in combat if you need to. I think this is good. Great might be an over-exaggeration, but I think this is solid. Like, especially if you have something like a Bloodghast on board, and you can just attack with this every turn for 2 and turn your Bloodghast into a card, I think that's really strong. Jadar, whatever. I think if you have a piece of repeatable sacrifice fodder generation, like, your opponent kind of has to deal with this, or you're just going to outdraw them and kill them.
Teld, what are your reservations against it?
It's a bear, and if I want to draw cards with my bear, I've already got Caustic Bronco. And I don't like when my cards require me to, my 2-drop requires me to play other good, better cards to be able to fuel it. Like, sure, if you've got a Jadar in play, you can sack the zombie to make this hit for 2, or you could just attack them for 2 with the Jadar every single turn and play other things. You know, obviously, like, this is a card that once you've got all the synergy engines going, it's probably okay. But even when we're talking about the ceiling on this card, we're drawing a card every turn and it hitting for 2, which is fine for 2 mana. But the floor on this card
really
is
good
it's a
for 2
bear.
mana.
The floor of the card is this is a bear, and I'm also struggling to think, like, what 2-drop am I willing to part with that we currently run in order to make this fit, because I think all the ones we run are better. Well, except for Blood Artist, but this is, like, if you want to replace a Blood Artist with this, because Blood Artist also requires a synergy piece, you know, I'm cool with that. I'm amenable to that, but yeah, I really don't, I just don't think much of this card, even at Peasant. I mean, I've got hesitations even at the
I was going to say, this reads to me like a fine Peasant card, but this is I think a mediocre card that Chris will make look good in the decks that Chris plays.
Yeah, this is one thing the viewer, the listener at home needs to remember is that Chris just sees sacrifice on a card and just immediately bumps it up like 2 letter grades from where it should be.
You're obviously going to curve this into Ophiomancer every single time.
Oh, Jesus Christ. That's exactly what I was
That's what's going to happen every single time, and then you're going to draw 4 cards and deal 8 damage, and your opponent's going to lose.
This card unopposed when you're getting your engine going is probably actually pretty strong. I don't think it's even just okay, it's pretty strong. Like, draw a card, nug you for 2, when I'm also triggering my other stuff, my Bastion. This into Bastion's pretty strong. Like, this into Woe Strider is pretty strong. But, obviously, like, it's same as that 2-mana 1/1 that grows when you play creatures. Like, it is very easy to pick apart a card like this.
My problem with cards like this is that, one, unlike Blood Artist, you can't, like, just play it and win the game by accident. You know, Blood Artist, like, as much as I crap on that card, does have spots where you play it and just instantly win the game with no counterplay. Yes. This card requires you to not only play it and be able to attack with it, it also requires you to already have the other good cards of your deck in play. Like, this is not the good card in your deck. You've already got the good cards in your deck in play. But if you've got those in, I don't know, like, and then, like, if we're talking about mid-game, right, because that's when this is going to come online, like, if you're trying to just go, all in or whatever, like, Yawgmoth is also better, which I know that's not fair to compare. But, like, it's just, like, our cube is so tight on space that cards like this that require you to actually draw the really good cards in your deck in order to do anything just don't really appeal to me.
This guy kind of looks like Yawgmoth.
I would take issue with the idea that you have to draw the good cards in your deck, because, like, isn't this a card that, like, turns your crap into, like, damage and more crap? Like, that's kind of what this card does, I think.
Sure, at the expense of mana and board presence.
Yeah, I mean, I could be sympathetic to the idea. Oh, nice, Tim. Yeah, we're doing a head-to-head comparison between an uncommon from a theoretical core set and a mythic from a Modern Horizons set. Yeah,
they look like the same character.
They do.
They are oddly similar arts, huh?
Yeah, Yawgmoth in the lab versus Yawgmoth terrorizing the people.
Vampire Yawg, yeah.
Vamp Yawg.
All right, so if this turns out to be 2-mana Yawgmoth, I'll rescind all of my comments, but I just don't see it.
This is going to be a do we have a cut for it card for me.
Yeah, we'll have to discuss that off air. I'm going to go on record and say that if you are looking at Peasant, especially, I think that if you're, like, looking for a good sacrifice outlet, I think that this is one, like, as sack outlets go.
I do like it better at Peasant.
Sure.
Like, I look at this compared to, like, Lampad of Death's Vigil, and I can't help but feel like this has just got to be better.
I'll blow through this next one real quick because it's not really anything we have to discuss, and then I'll hand it back to you for the black creatures. But Vengeful Blood Witch is a 1 and a black for a 1/1 vampire warlock at uncommon, and whenever this or another creature you control dies, target opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So this is just another Zulaport Cutthroat Blood Artist type card for people who are going for like maximum density. It's actually worse than Zulaport Cutthroat. It's strictly worse because of the multiplayer applications, but for, arena card pool, like this is Blood Artist number 6 or whatever if you want it. Not much else to discuss there as far as that, but let's chat about this one. What do we got here?
We have Dark Confidant, which for those of you who are unaware is 1 and a black for a 2/1 human wizard. Beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. You lose life equal to its mana value.
Where's it at? Is it a Jace? Is it a Venser?
I think it is better than a Venser. I know that this is probably going to cause like some consternation, but I think this probably holds up better than Jace the Mind Sculptor does, in my opinion, just because it's so cheap. But this card was printed forever ago, and stat lines are different. So like you have to look at all of these creatures in terms of the amount that you're getting out of the card. Like it wouldn't shock me today to see them print this as like a 2/3. It will feel weird not to try it. I'm going to let Teld speak to how he feels this compares against Bronco, because my feeling is that I think it's probably still better.
If you had asked me this question before actually playing Bronco, I probably would have agreed, but I'm actually in the camp that Bronco is probably substantially better than this card for a couple of reasons. Firstly, if you're behind, Bronco doesn't guarantee you lose life, right? Like you can just choose to not draw with it and block instead. Additionally, Bronco gives you the option of just nugging your opponent, which is actually Bronco kills people real quickly when you're doing that.
So you've seen the saddle mode come up like enough times?
Yeah, I think it's the default mode to play it most of the time. Like you're wanting to saddle Bronco. I think the fact that and this is like where it gets a little unfair, but there's a reason that this card just sees 0 play anymore and Bronco sees multi-format play. I think Bronco is a good bit better just on also being able to attack into 1/1s is really nice. This, doesn't block or attack particularly well. Also, I just have to say, I know it's an old card and everybody's talking about it, but the flavor and the art on this one just doesn't hit the same for me. The not having greatness at any cost on there really lowers my thoughts on this card. And I know that's not really fair, but I just think that was so iconic that they should have not touched that one. This new art or this new flavor sucks.
It does. I like this art quite a bit better than the OG art. I really hate the OG art on Dark Confidant, and then there was the reprint art that's fine. I actually like this art for Dark Confidant, but I don't understand why they just couldn't use the classic flavor text, because the classic flavor text is literally shorthand for people describing what Black's color pie is. It's literally that iconic. This flavor text is pretty lazy. For our own cube, I realize that it is a completely and totally different card, and I will also say that I actually was in a championship round at the end of our last Swiss where Osteomancer Adept was a 2-drop that I had to keep off the board because otherwise I was just going to get Grave Titaned every turn.
Yeah, it looked quite good. It looked quite good in that deck.
So maybe we don't need to cut that quite yet to make room for something else, but I do feel not that this is the most important thing in the world, but I do feel if we don't try Dark Confidant, even if we have players that probably agree with our assessment, they're going to want to at least have had the opportunity to play with Dark Confidant. So I think we should probably find a place to test this, and I think there's a decent chance that it will disappoint. There's also something to be said for between Caustic Bronco, Darkstar Augur, and the Sorin Planeswalker, that there might just be too many ways to draw cards and hurt yourself in black at a certain point.
Well, that compounded with things like Deluge and the black MDFC that you pay 3 life to have it come in. That all adds up. Each one of those is a tick.
Bitter Triumph
against black at some point.
Bitter Triumph and Infernal Grasp.
Well, and we can have this discussion off air, but I think if I want to find a spot for this, I would rather cut Augur than Bronco, because I just think Bronco is such a solid slot, even though it's kind of the obvious swap if you wanted to keep the mana cost the same. I really like Bronco's flexibility of being able to block, being able to not kill you if you're behind, and also being able to push through and damage your opponent. I think all those are really valuable things to have on that card.
Understood. Okay, yeah, we can discuss that off air. I think we should find room to try this. I share the opinion that some of these older like legendary cards that like I would have salivated over getting at a certain point are just maybe not where context has changed. So we'll see.
Primeval Titan, yeah. I did want to note, I think it's very important. Caustic Bronco turns off your Theomancer, though, so like checkmate on that one.
Ooh. Okay, so this next card is Abyssal Harvester. It's 1 black for a 3/2, which is obviously not an impressive stat line at rare these days. However, it has tap, exile target creature card from a graveyard that was put there this turn, create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a nightmare in addition to its other types, then exile other nightmare tokens you control. So obviously, like, the mitigator there is you can't just like keep building a ridiculous board by just exiling a creature every turn and keeping it. Obviously, it can't really describe the art to you, but let's just say that as a person who bought his first pack of cards in 1997, this has a very nostalgic kind of black art take to me, where like a lot of black creatures were kind of like twisted and quasi-surreal with a lot of like organic curvature kind of built in them. This is a very classic looking black card to me, which I always appreciate as an older player. As far as the card itself is concerned, 3/2 for 3 is not something that anybody is writing home about. You know, just ask Midnight Reaper. The ability itself is cool, but you either have to like trade in combat with it. First of all, it doesn't have haste, obviously, so you can't like trade in combat and then play this and like surprise somebody, like somebody's going to see this coming. You either have to trade off for a creature the turn that you want to do this, or you have to like untap with this Doomblade and then do it.
My guy, you're not thinking big enough.
What? No.
We're gonna untap with this. We're gonna slam Malevolent Rumble, and then we're gonna exile the Grave Titan we just put in there with our card.
Gotcha.
That's an important note. Is it can get back a creature that went to the graveyard from anywhere. It doesn't have to be something that died from a removal spell.
True. That is true, I guess. Like, you could like sacrifice like your own thing.
You could land cycle your troll and then bring your troll back into play.
You can do that. Yeah.
As an example.
My feeling is that there are a lot of good black 3-drops, and it's not even necessarily that it's slow. So a couple of things. I think that there's a little too much specificity in terms of what needs to happen for this to have an impact. And then my other problem with it is unless I have ways to enable this myself, like, I discarded my whatever to Bone Shards, and then, like, here's my Grave Titan nerd or whatever. If you don't have that kind of stuff going on in your own deck, then this is really rough into aggressive decks if you're planning on trying to sort of, like, utilize your opponent's graveyard, plus the 2 toughness means you're not profitably blocking anything. But on the other hand, if you're playing against like a green deck, which black decks with their removal tend to already be pretty solid against, like, I really don't like the idea of like my opponent plays this and then I'm like, okay, well, I was going to ramp into my Vorinclex, but I'm 99% sure now that if I play it, you're just going to remove it next turn and then you're going to make a free Vorinclex. What are we up to on the polar counter? Is this number 3?
No, I think this might be 2.
This might be 2. This feels polar to me in its matchups.
Sure, maybe. I'm torn on this card because on the one hand, I agree with everything you said, and I think its stat line is not particularly impressive for 3 mana. On the other hand, this card rules. Like, this card is so cool.
It is very cool.
I just want to be dumping. I just want to land cycle my troll and then put it back into play and put 6/5 worth of stats into play for 0 mana, or for like 1 mana. That's so good.
Sorry, could you say I just want to be dumping again real quick, just one more time, like more. Yeah, this is a Drake Hatcher's card where I'm like, I don't know that it's actually good enough.
I do think this card's way better than Drake Hatcher for what it's worth.
Sure, I mean, yeah, that comparison doesn't even matter though. Like,
sure. I get your point. I get your
thing there, but that's also like a Tonk card. So, this card's cool. Like, I think we can all agree it's cool whether it gets there or not. I would like to play a cube that has this card in it. I don't know if our cube is the right one for it though.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite cards in the set. It just like really cool. Like, I don't think it's good. 3/2 worth of stats for 3 mana is going to be a rough sell, but this is one of those cards that you see and you're just like, oh man, think of all the cool things you can do with this card.
Yeah.
There's a dream there. Teld, this is your waifu, right? The next card.
Oh yeah, this is my body pillow. I've already ordered it. Yeah, we're gonna go.
Sorry, every time somebody says waifu, I have a flashback to a time, like one of the last times I was in a card shop and I was like sitting there and I was like playing my game or whatever, and I heard this guy in the corner of the room say Bulma is waifu, and it was not a joke, and I was just like, I can't come back here. Like, I can't be here anymore. Anyway, go ahead.
So this is Ophelia, not Felia, Viper Whisperer, and
Whisper.
it is one in a black for a 1/3 Gorgon assassin. And it has Death Touch, and when it attacks, you may pay 1 and a Golgari mana. If you do, create a 1/1 black snake creature with Death Touch. And then for 4 and a black, until the end of turn, whenever 1 or more Gorgons or snakes you control deal combat damage to a player, that player loses half their life rounded up. I don't really care about that line of text, but what I care about is that this is a solid defensive 2-drop that allows you to start generating more defensive board presence in the form of snakes. It's not quite Ophiomancer, but like there's some play to it that Ophiomancer doesn't really have. You can get
actively bad with Ophiomancer again.
Yeah, bad with Ophiomancer for sure. But yeah, like just being able to attack in, your opponent has to block it, or you get to keep making snakes means that they're probably encouraged to trade off with it. So I think this card is just like a good card, right? It makes board presence for your sack decks. It's a decent little defensive 2-drop that then makes more board presence for your Jund or control decks or whatever. So I think all the knobs on this are turned right that I'm at least interested in trying it.
I'm right there with you on that. Like, as a fodder generator, it's obviously not incredible because it's pretty expensive to generate fodder, but the flip side of that is the Death Touch body on this, and then making the Death Touch 1/1 stabilizes boards very well, so it's a very good defensive creature. So similar to Ophiomancer, I think it has both applications in black decks that want to be producing bodies and mid-range black decks that just want to survive until they're landing their, Acquazatzes and Titans, things of that nature. I can see this being completely fucking obnoxious against green decks, but like so is Ophiomancer. So yeah, I like this quite a bit as what's the terminology that we used to use? I don't want to call it an anchor card, but because it's a good mid-rangey defensive creature that
like
can
a
turn
glue
games.
card.
Yes, it has applications in multiple archetypes, and that's always good news for a cube card.
This is going to be like the 20 to 23rd card in every single deck you play it in, but it probably gets there as a 20 to 23rd card. Like it's not going to be part of your core deck, but it is a solid 2-drop that will fill out your curve and will be playable in all the decks that you want to play it in.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Yeah, so I'm a fan.
It's basically Dragonkin Berserker, right?
Okay, yeah.
Kind of the same card.
I guess.
I'm a little annoyed. Like, I know it's a Gorgon, but I'm a little annoyed there were no actual snakes in the art of the card. So anyway,
yeah, they couldn't make the hair snakes because then it wouldn't be sexy waifu or whatever.
Yeah.
No, people would be into that. Like, come on. Gorex? Who added Gorex? Why did Gorex get new art? The card's not that
I did not realize.
Why is this anime art Gorex?
I didn't even realize this was a reprint. This was
it was a commander card that then got reprinted in, I think, Commander Masters as an uncommon, and then is showing up here as like those Elden Ring things where you get to copy your remembrances. You get to beat up their feet, and then you
Gorex is a 6 black for a 4/4 Death Toucher, and as an additional cost, you may exile any number of creature cards from your graveyard. It costs 2 less for each one exiled this way, and when it attacks or dies, you pick a random card exiled with it and return it to its owner's hand. So I guess I was posing this because if you play a 2-mana 4/4 Death Toucher, that's pretty good, especially when it starts drawing cards as time goes, especially if you get to attack with it. That being said, at 4 mana, this card's not very good at all, and at 6 mana, it's absolutely terrible. At 8 mana, it's like obviously just not even a card. So I guess I was just one of those like, is this card decent? Like I don't actually know. I've never played with it, but it's like one of those cards that feels like if you can dump 3 cards into your graveyard really quickly to exile with it, it would be pretty good if you're playing this on like turn 4 with a Doomblade or like another 2-drop or something, but also probably too much setup.
Yeah, it has to be creature cards in black. A lot of those are cards you don't want to exile from your graveyard, like your blood. Like, do you really want to exile your blood gas? I guess if you could guarantee that you're going to get them back over time. Also, probably a great idea to have an 8-drop in a section that has 3 Dark Confidants. Mm-hmm. That's just bad deck building, but yeah, I think this is going to be stuck on like 4 to 6 mana too much. It's treading on the same kind of territory as Croxa,
Sure.
As far as eating your graveyard for things. So I don't think this card gets there, but I do see the dream of like 2 mana 4/4 Death Touch that draws a card when it attacks. Like there's high upside there, but I think this is just going to be a little bit. I mean, what deck wants this, right? The decks that have the black recursive creatures you don't want to exile from your graveyard.
And the blue control decks don't have enough creatures to actually take advantage of this. Yeah, I see what you're getting at. I actually think this would have... I am a little sad, actually, that this isn't an uncommon, because this would be a cool card to talk about for Peasant.
Technically it is Peasant legal because of the way rarity works and stuff like that. It has been printed out in common. So if you're on Arena and you want to build your own Peasant Cube, you can put this card in there. We will not be doing that.
Still taxes your player as a rare wild card, so keep that in mind.
Yes.
And you're not... This is not part of the draftable set, so that will take an actual rare wild card from them.
I assume Chris put High Society Hunter on here.
I did. I just wanted to toss it out here. So High Society Hunter is 3 black for a 5/3 flyer, which is obviously going to clock your opponent pretty quick. Whenever this creature attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Whenever another non-token creature dies, draw a card. This is a Baneslayer. It's not...
Wait, this is just that 2-drop,
Chris,
but as a 5-drop.
I take back what I said about the 2-drop. This is worse.
This is the same card, isn't it? Just scaled up to a 5-drop.
This is 3 mana more for a card that is not as good as your 2-drop, all right? If this is your sell, is to give me a really, really bad card to compare it to, you're doing a good job.
Oh, no, I'm not trying to sell this as something that, like, we should play. It's just, like, if you have a sacrifice type theme, I think that this is kind of a cool card. Not to mention the fact that you can just, like, play this pre-combat and then swing, and then it's not once per turn. So if you, like, play this and jam into their board and they have to, like, trade off on blocks or whatever, you can draw multiple cards. But, like, this doesn't hold a candle to some of your more powerful black 5-drops. I just wanted to throw it out there because I think it's kind of a cool design, even though it's probably not particularly good.
Chris on his mission to mention every single card that requires sacrificing or creatures dying in every single set.
Yeah. Speaking of...
No, this guy's not mine.
This was me. I just wanted to throw out that we didn't previously have this. This is Desecration Demon. It's 2 black for a 6/6 flying demon. At the beginning of each combat, your opponent may sacrifice a creature of their choice. If they do, you tap it and put a +1 counter on Desecration Demon. The demon taps. So I just want to mention this. I mean, I'm sure this has been power crept out, but this was one of the best cards and defining cards in Standard for most of its lifespan. It was very good basically the entire time it was in Standard.
Yeah, this was a huge constructed card when I first started playing Magic.
Everything makes tokens now, though. That's part of the problem.
Yeah, granted, sacrifice a creature is better than if this was just like sack a non-land
totally
permanent or whatever. Didn't we see a blue card like this in Streets of New Capenna? It was like the Kraken that made fish if your opponent didn't sack a creature or something like that.
Yeah.
It was something. Obviously, that's a blue card, like much less desirable there. There's also they did this a lot. They've done 4 mana 6/6 flyer with like downside multiple times. I know there's an alchemy card that's like Consuming Oni or something like that, where you lose 3 life on your upkeep. I don't know, but I don't see a world where this really gets. There's so many decks that can exploit it and just make it a non-factor, I think, and then like. Imagine the mirror match where this is actually just giving your opponent a sack outlet.
Sure. I mean, I think if you're going to like immediately jump to the negatives, though, there is the other side where against like your control opponent, this is just a 4 mana 6/6 that like beats them to death in 3 turns. And against the green opponent, it is also just like sacrificing actual cards because green doesn't produce as many tokens. So maybe it's like a little bit polar to say the word again.
It is.
In that regard. But yeah, this is actually a legitimately very powerful rot card because the more removal that you're backing this with, and this card's also really, really good with Toxic Deluge because you can do Deluge for like 4 or 5 and still keep it in play.
Sure, yeah.
So the more interaction you're playing, the more rocky your deck is where you're trying to like have this be the last card standing, the better it gets because then the less junk your opponent's going to have laying around.
Yeah, it's a cool card. If you wanted to test it, we could.
This is big nostalgia bait for me because this was when I was playing the most Standard. Is during the time where the mono black Gary deck was the best deck in Standard. I was playing a ton of Moto at the time, so not necessarily in paper Standard, but it was when I was actually probably playing the most games of Standard. So I just have good memories with this card.
Yeah, I have bad memories of this card. I played like Boros Precon at that time. Yeah, we can talk off air about whether or not this makes a cut over a different 4-drop or something like that. But closing out black, Night's Whisper, nice reprint from the Jumpstart. 1 in a black sorcery. You draw 2 cards, you lose 2 life. I mean, we already had Sign in Blood, but it's funny how much better Night's Whisper is than Sign in Blood. There's also, what was that alchemy card? Painful something?
Painful Bond.
Oh, the card that they alchemied into a completely different card?
Yeah, they changed it. It was like an instant speed Night's Whisper that like dinged you over time for your cheap spells in hand or whatever cards you had in hand or whatever.
Well, it used to ding you for your expensive card.
Spells. But you didn't play any expensive cards, and then they completely changed it so that it dinged you for your cheap spells, and then it became unplayable.
Sure. Obviously, that's a different card here, but Night's Whisper, I think Night's Whisper makes both cubes, doesn't it? Like, this is just good rate, 2 mana.
Probably. I'm not excited about it by any means, but like, it's probably a fine enough filler card if you're just looking for a 2-for-1. I think there's better 2-for-1s you can get, but it's hard to say no to just, this clean of a text box.
Teld's gonna hard disagree with me, but I think that this is worse than Painful Bond, because even though Painful Bond dings you every time you play a cheap spell, like, by the time... If Painful Bond is in your hand, like, and I have other stuff to do, by the time I'm interested in casting Painful Bond, like, is it actually going to do more than 3 damage to me? Probably not, and it's an instant. So, like, I think it's quite a bit better than Night's Whisper, personally, because I'm not firing it off on turn 2. Like, I'm going to empty my hand, and then I'm going to fire it off.
I think most of the time they're like comparable, like they're different cards, and also I don't think we'd be interested in Painful Bond. I think I've seen Painful Bond dome people for 3+ too many times to really think it's all that good at this point. I don't know. Like I don't. Like I said, I'm not high on Night's Whisper. I've mentioned before off air that I think this card is fairly power crept in terms of how powerful it is, but I think it's still a fine enough card. Just 2 mana, draw 2 cards for is it's a reasonable place to be. But I'm never going to be excited to put this card in my deck.
Yeah, I mean,
Sure.
We could try it. It just, like, I see it in powerful cubes, too. I just think it's kind of filler. Like, we've talked about how 2 mana draw 2 for sorcery speed in blue is something that we want, and, not to whine too much, but, like, the fact that black has 2 mana draw 2, lose some life, like, implies to me that blue should have just 2 mana draw 2 cards without the downside, because, like, drawing cards is what blue's supposed to do, but I don't know. This strikes me as an okay card that I'm always going to... Like, the first time I'm at, like, 24 cards and I'm, like, looking for a card to cut, it's probably going to be this random 2 mana draw 2 in black. Because black has ways to generate, like, virtual card advantage with cards that actually, like, do stuff. Because they're either recursive or disruptive or something like that. And we've also mentioned, like, we're really starting to stack up ways for black to do damage to itself to gain some kind of advantage. Like, if we want to play this, we can. It just strikes me as, like, super unnecessary.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's not a super sexy card, that's for sure. But that does close out black. Teld, do you want to do some card reading here with red? Red's actually a pretty large section, it looks like. It's actually just a lot of creatures.
Okay, sure. So we'll lead off with Kellen, Planar Savannah Lions, and it is a single red mana for a 2/1, and for 1 and a red. If Kellen is a scout, he starts out as a human fairy scout. It becomes a human fairy detective and gains whenever he deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. And then for 2 and a red, if he's a detective, so if you've used the first ability, he becomes a 3/2 fairy rogue and gains double strike. So, like, that card's just bad, right? This is a Savannah Lion.
This isn't an apology for Ragavan, isn't it? Because it's a 1 mana card that you have to pay 2 mana to turn it into Ragavan without the treasure.
Yeah, like this card's just not very good. Savannah Lions are already mediocre unless they have substantial upside. And this one you have to pay like 6 mana altogether before it's a real card. I think this card really needed a way on the first trigger, kind of the Figure of Destiny style, gain some amount of combat stats or combat, like
first strike or something. Like.
Yeah, the first mode. Also, like, you even on turn 2, you play this. You don't want to flip it on turn 2 because then, like, you hit your opponent and you draw a card that has to be cast that turn. And you don't even get to cast it next turn.
Mm-hmm. Mishra's Bauble, baby. We're hitting Mishra's Bauble.
We're hitting Bauble every time.
I feel like the design of this card makes no sense to me. It just feels like a card that the pieces don't really line up in any sort of way that makes me see a good curve with the card. Despite liking Kellen a lot, I was actually when I saw Kellen was a 1-drop and it had multiple abilities, I was like, oh man, we're getting Kellen, Figure of Destiny. I figured it was going to be something like, the first time it becomes like a 3/1 first striker and then it gains flying or something. I thought we were going to get something cool, and instead they gave us this.
Yeah, I keep rereading it looking for, like, the kick, like, where's the kicker on it, and it just doesn't. I mean, it just doesn't have a kicker. Like, it's too much of a mana investment. The only reason I included it on the list, and we could have just as easily not talked about it, is, like, we're still kind of looking for decent red 1-drops, and it's like, Savannah Lions plus text, like, is it good enough? Probably not.
Well, so the way that I read this card is, like, I think it's easy to read it and look at it as, like, oh, well, I can play it on 1, I can activate it on 2, I can activate it on 3, and, like, that's what I'm supposed to be doing with it. But then when you read it, like, that's a really, really terrible line. the way that I read this card, and I'm not saying that makes this card good, but I read this card as it's Savannah Lions on turn 1, but if you top deck it late when you're out of gas, you top decked like a 1-drop that can become a 3/2 double striker that starts drawing cards. And I think that's where the strength of it is, right? Like,
okay.
Because like,
it just doesn't attack into things though.
Well, yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. Like, what I'm talking about is, like, if I top deck it late, then, like, I play it and activate it, and then the next turn I activate it again, draw another card, and I'm attacking with, like, a 3/2 double striker. That's significantly better late game potential than any other 1-drop. But because the first activation mode says you may play that card this turn instead of to the end of your next turn, like, if that said to the end of your next turn, then you could at the very least, like, go 1-drop. And then they go, okay, land, pass, and then I activate this attack, get my 2 in, and then, like, I still drew a card. But, like, it doesn't get to do that. I also think it's kind of weird that it's a fairy that doesn't, as you upgrade it, gain flying.
Yeah, I think if I could have designed this card, I would have made the first mode give first strike and this effect, and then the third mode, instead of double strike, make it into, like, a 3/2 flyer or something.
Or something.
Half the Kellens don't fly, right?
Yeah,
like
that's all true.
So for some reason, I guess when I think of Kellen, I just assume he flies, but I guess that's true. Like,
some of them fly, some of them don't. Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like Chris likes it like marginally more, but still, are you evaluating your 1-drop as a late game top deck? I guess that's nice that it does something, on turn 6, but like, does this get there for you as a test card? Because it just seems all very clunky and hard to justify. It does have value on turn 1 and value on turn 6, but like it doesn't have value from like turn 3 through 5 because you're just not putting mana into this until you can like level it up in 1 turn probably.
What I do kind of like about the card is if I play this on turn 1 and I get off like 1 attack and then it gets bricked, because that's what happened to Savannah Lions. It got in its 2 damage, and then as the game progresses later, if I start drawing into lands or running out of stuff to do, then I can pump mana into it and make my 1-drop into something. Like, if it's a 3/2 double striker that can draw 2 cards in a turn if your opponent doesn't block it or remove it, like, that is significantly powerful. The same token, you spent 6 mana to get there. I read this and think this doesn't read smooth to me, but I also read this and think there's enough going on here that playing with the card could reveal that this package is actually pretty nice. Like, this one I think is a little bit more difficult to game out. I also personally, in red, do like cheaper cards that still have value if you draw them later. As red Savannah Lions go, I think this is the most interesting one that I've ever seen. I would not mind testing it if the consensus was, from you two, like, why in God's name would I ever want to test this? Then that's not going to break my heart. It is an interesting enough design that I wouldn't hate seeing what it does, and I do think that there are a card or 2 in red that we could trim to try it and see what happens. It doesn't scream phenomenal to me, but there's enough text on the card that I'm willing to bet that it's potentially better than it reads like it is.
Yeah, I'm not in the camp of this is so unplayably bad that you'd be an idiot for suggesting it. I just don't really get excited about it, despite it being Kellen in a cowboy hat, which is really cool. Love the OTJ vibes. But
that's his body pillow is Kellen in a cowboy hat.
But yeah, I mean, like, if you want to try this, I'm open to potentially trying it. I just think it will probably suffer the fate of every other Savannah line, where it's just not going to be very good.
Let's chat more about that one off air. You know what this is actually really good with? Highway Robbery.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can discard it.
You can discard it, yeah.
Draw different cards. All right, what do we have next?
Sear Slicer Goblin is 1 and a red for a 2. This is such a clean card, and I like the art too. Mm-hmm. Sear Slicer Goblin, 1 and a red for a 2/1. Bad stat line, but it has raid at the end of your end step. If you attack with a creature, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. I really like this card. It doesn't have to attack to do the thing. It does provide, stats like if you need it. Wow, the alternate art's actually really cool.
It's like a turtle monster.
I dig it. It kind of reminds me of that weird Neo Goblin that, like, if you could, like, sacrifice an artifact to bring back, like, a 3-drop artifact or something. I can't remember what it was called.
Sure.
That's because this is a Kamigawa Goblin.
It is a Kamigawa Goblin.
It's a Kamigoblin. So I like this card. because it helps red go wide, and with the good anthems that exist in white and like War Leader's Call, like I think there are actual ways to draft towards like Boros token strategies that have synergies that can outvalue just like straight Boros aggro if you go more mid-rangey. But in addition to this, like we've seen recently that red-black is actually a very functional sacrifice combo. Like there are things going on in red now that used to be exclusively kind of white's purview. And this is a really great way to just like every time you attack with your blood gas for free and just play another land and get it back, you just get to make another 1/1. Mm-hmm. I like this card quite a bit.
Yeah, plays really well in that black-red sack shell with like Jadar and the Sewer King or whatever the rat. The cards that create little cheap expendable attackers and things like that.
So you can keep making more of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the crux of this card is going to be, do you have the 1-drop to play on turn 1? Because this is where we've talked before about it's not so much what your 1-drop does, it's having a 1-drop is the important part, just being able to play to the board early. And this is one of those cards that continues to push that trend where I don't really care if you play Thraben Inspector, Voldaren Epicure, or, Monastery Swiftspear, like... Obviously, some of those are going to be better for the decks this is going to go in than others, but my point is that you just want to have something to play on turn 1 so that you can get the raid on turn 2, because if you have to play this as a 2/1 on turn 2, if it's your only 2-drop, this card really stinks if you did not get the raid trigger. But it's a nice little 2-mana engine. Your opponent probably has to deal with it. It goes well with all the go-wide synergies in the Naya Spectrum, as well as the black-red sack sort of stuff, so I think this is a solid little glue card that probably will play out pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
It stinks if you don't get the raid trigger on 2, but if you just turn 3, go Screaming Nemesis attack you and get the raid trigger on turn 3, like this only ever has to make 1 token,
sure, for
it to be good, and that can be out through the course of the game. You only ever pay 2 mana on this, so if it makes 1 goblin on turn 4, you go like attack with my 3-drop, play this, and another 2-drop, make a goblin. That's pretty strong too. So like obviously just running this out on turn 2 as your 2-drop feels sad. Mm-hmm. But if you can get value out of it later, it's quite good. So I like this too. I think, you're going to see this make a goblin more often than not. People are just going to make the attacks to make that happen. So this is obviously maybe not a very, very good card, but has a really high ceiling. Really bad floor, but a floor that I think is going to be mitigated in the decks that you played, and you're just going to be able to make that token pretty often, I think.
Yeah, just to be clear, some of the other cards I've talked bad about, I think this one's good. I do think this one's good. I was just pointing out the failed cases for it.
Yeah, 100% they exist. If you're not going like 1-drop into this, if you go 1-drop into this, like you're off to the fucking races. Like that's actually a very scary start, I think. But if I draw this on like turn 5 and I already have a board presence and then I play it, then it just starts going to work. The other thing that I think is really cool about it is that once you make that first token, if you have an instant speed sack out route, you can just attack with the token, sack it when it's blocked or whatever, and then you just make another token. So it's sort of doing what Goblin Warboss is doing every turn.
Or if you got like a Vrain in play, you just sack the token, you chump attack the token and make a new one.
It just replaces it. It's like Jadar in that sense.
Exactly. Yeah. It kind of starts to do, with the right pieces on board, it starts to do a Jadar thing, where like with a Blood Artist effect or an instant speed sacrifice outlet, or ideally both, it's just making a token every single turn without like risking the biscuit. And if it was like an enchantment that did that, that wouldn't be phenomenal. But if you're pushing damage, like the fact that this is a 2-power attacker that in like Boros go wide decks I was talking about can be anthemed to also be relevant. I don't expect this to be like a show-stopping powerhouse. Like I don't think I would ever put this in my deck before I put Karizev in my deck. But that's more a testament to how fucking awesome Karizev is. But I like this card quite a bit.
You start doing the chainsaw thing where you equip up the token.
Oh god! Or Transmigrant's Crown. You just slap it on the token like Jadar every turn,
and then just get your token back. Yeah, sweet stuff there. That's a cool 2-drop. One of the first cards they revealed from the set too, and it's like, oh, this set is going to have some good cards.
So next up we have General Crete, the Bolt Bringer. It's kind of a cool name, actually. So 2 in a red for a legendary goblin soldier. It's a 2/2, and whenever 1 or more goblins you control attack, create a 1/1 goblin creature token that's attacking and tapped. And whenever another creature you control ETBs, it deals 1 damage to your opponent. So this is cool in that it's an impact tremors effect on a creature that also makes its own little dudes, and it triggers itself when you attack with it because it is a goblin. And after you trigger it the first time, you can kind of just ship with the goblins you make if they're still around to keep it out of trouble. Plays well with the last card we were talking about. You know, I don't think we're going to play this in our unrestricted cube or our mainline cube, but this is a pretty pushed uncommon. It's got it's kind of rabble mastery, but also kind of molten gatekeepery. Both of the, you know, this is a solid card.
It's a tuned down rabble master, but with the upside of getting that impact tremors, which is meaningful upside. Look at War Leader's Call, right, which is obviously an Anthem too, but they've been tacking that ability on a lot of stuff lately.
Well, it's because they listen to the podcast and they've heard me say enough times that we need to see impact tremors type stuff that is attached to things that impact the board. Like,
yeah, I have a hard time imagining this in a slot where you could be playing like Legion War Boss or actual Rabble Master, but like obviously it plays well with those cards. So, like, I mean, 3 mana 2/2 is a pretty hard knock against it, but I think we're going to talk about this one again in Peasant Cube, where I think it gets so much better because Molten Gatekeeper is just, like, been very good as well. Our red 3s are awesome.
Yeah. If you're interested in this card, I'm going to say I don't think you need to have a Goblins tribal deck in your cube, but there are incidentally, like, enough playable goblins, depending on your power level, that are just don't need to be in a Goblins tribal deck that, like, maybe if you think this card is cool, which I personally do, because as I mentioned, I've been kind of like yelling from the rooftops, we need impact tremor style effects on things that impact the board. Maybe if you're interested in this card, you can like look around at some of the other slots and go like, okay, are there things that I'm playing that could be different goblins without sacrificing significant amounts of power from the slot, and just maybe play 3 or 4 more goblins than you were originally playing that are still good cards to facilitate this being a good card.
Put Siege Gang Commander in over Glorybringer, for example.
You should definitely be playing Siege Gang Commander in 2024. I like this card. It does make me a little sad because this is like the foundation set, and this seems like the perfect set to have just printed Goblin Rabble Master onto Arena, because I don't think having Goblin Rabble Master in Standard all the time would like break Standard, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know.
Maybe. They did go pretty hard on goblins in this set. There's a lot of mainline goblin. Like, they put Krenko Mob Boss in the main set, so they're clearly doing goblin stuff.
Oh, was Krenko
I do wish this was
Krenko
like...
was main set?
Krenko's main set, I believe, yeah. Next up, a card I just wanted to mention as a back pocket card. Anya's Ravager is 2 and a red for a 3/3 rare Vampire Berserker. It attacks each combat if able, and when it attacks, you discard your hand and draw 3 cards. Important thing here being that it has Madness for 1 and a red. So, like, if we ever get there on the Fiery Temper style, like, discard Madness decks, I think this card has a home. As it stands, I absolutely loathe the text, must attack each combat if able. I just absolutely hate playing with cards like that. So, not a huge fan, but, you know, there's a dream of drawing 3 cards every time this attacks.
Yeah, and notably, this is the other good Madness card outside of Fiery Temper. So, you know, those are the 2 cards you can actually kind of build your section around with. Like,
I want Madness to matter before I'm interested in the card. Which incidentally matters sometimes. Do you like it more than that, Chris?
I do. I know that the Bun Magic Cube, which is curated by the Lucky Paper Radio guys, that shows up in the 3-drop slot. My one knock against the card is I think I basically want to be mono red, because I want to be putting this in a deck where by the time I'm like on 4 mana, I have this low enough card count in my hand that like drawing 3 is like what I want to be doing, and then like dumping that stuff. Our 3-drops are great, so I don't think we need to find a cut for this, but I do. It is a Crazy Madness enabler, obviously, and it has Madness, so if you have a Madness theme in your cube, I think this is an absolute fucking no-brainer. But a 3/3 for 3, which is, you know, obviously real mid stat line, but a 3/3 for 3 that, you know, is putting you like up a card or 2 every I think this is actually a fantastic top deck for any kind of mono red deck, right? When you're out of gas, it's like, here's 3 mana up stats, like maybe you can chump block it, but I don't know. I think it's a good card. I'm not going to go to the mattress saying we need to test it, but I think it's a good card.
Yeah. Again, back pocket card if the Madness stuff ever gets there, or we do like a thematic cube or something where discard matters, you know, containment construct type stuff, conspiracy theorist type stuff.
What's with all these red 3s? We have another one to talk about later. Jesus.
Yeah, there's another one coming up. Teld, do you want to take the Dragon Cube, Dragon Cube's newest edition?
The 5-drop cube?
Everyone knows how much I love Dragon Cube.
Love Dragon Cube.
So this is Twin Flame Tyrant. It is 3 red for a 3/5 mythic dragon with flying. And if a source you control would deal damage to your opponent or permanent they control, you double the damage. So this is functionally a 5 mana 6/5 that doubles all your damage. I don't think this is for us, but it is kind of cool. If you give this like double strike, or if you give this a monstrous rage, it starts doing a bunch of damage. I'm sure there's a bunch of like this probably has big Baneslayer energy in the sense that if you untap with it, I assume you just kill your opponent.
Well, hear me out for a second, because when they revealed this card really early on, when we were like all watching that stream together, and I was like, wow, what a boring ass mythic rare. They revealed a bunch of like monocolored mythics that are like these iconic like creature types like Hydra, Dragon, Sphinx, so on, and I was like, wow, could you make a more boring dragon? And then revisiting, I'm like, first off, 6/5 for 5 is way better than 3/5 for 5, and this is functionally 6, but also like you don't necessarily have to untap with this to get value off of it. It doubles the power of all creatures you control on board. So, your Dragonkin Berserker suddenly is attacking as a 4 power first striker. All of your 2/2s are now 4/2s. So like it adds the damage to your creatures that are dealing damage as well. And then if you do untap with it, not only does it get to hit and your other creatures are dealing double damage, but your burn spells deal double damage to your opponent and their creatures as well.
Sure, you like Embercleave your opponent for 16.
I mean, you could go on the top end with Embercleave and just murder somebody, sure, but I'm saying like your Lightning Strike can now deal 6 to your opponent. Like you can close out the game very, very quickly on top of this hitting for 6. So there's no way this supplants Glorybringer as far as like 5-drop dragons go, but I do kind of like this more than like a Goldspan dragon or something if you're looking for a top end like red finisher, because the fact that it just essentially doubles the power of all creatures you control is not negligible. So I think there's something to this card despite the text box being just like, it's Furnace of Wrath on a dragon, It's hard to be like, oh, we want more 5-drops or anything like that, but I don't think this card is just like, it reads like a boring nonsense core set filler fare, but I think the card is actually quite powerful.
Good follow-up to an Enduring Courage, too.
Oh, sure, yeah. You hit your opponent for, 10? And then Enduring Courage gets to attack as a 6/3, sure. Or follow this up with Inferno Titan, you get to, like, essentially spread out 6 damage as you want and stuff like that. So I think there's something to this card. I have trouble imagining we're going to find room for another 5-drop dragon that isn't named Glorybringer, though. But I didn't want to dismiss this either, because I dismissed it on first read.
All right, so next up, we've got Gornog, the Red Reaper. So it's 2 and a red for a legendary Minotaur warrior with haste. Cowards can't block warriors, one of my favorite lines of text in Magic. And whenever one or more warriors you control attack a player, target creature that player controls becomes a coward. And attacking warriors you control have +X/+O, where X is the number of cowards your opponents control. So if you read between the lines, this is essentially a 3/3 on-crop crasher for warriors. Like, this card can't be blocked by an increasing number of creatures every turn, because your opponent's creatures don't stop being cowards. So the number of creatures they can block with goes down by 1 every turn. And then it gets bigger every turn. So it starts at 3/3, and then a 4/3, and then a 5/3, etc. as long as you keep making cowards. I don't know if this is one for us, but like the art's kind of cool. The effect's kind of cool. I love these like coward warrior type cards, and just really sick name. Just a nifty little card.
I think this card's strong. It's worth noting that it does not remove your opponent's creature from being able to block. They simply can't block your warrior, so they can't block this. They could still block elsewhere, though. And I checked, I think our red section has 1 warrior and our green section has 1 warrior. So, like, you're not doing a compounded warrior thing. It does remove your opponent's creature types, if that matters, and turns them into cowards. So, like, they might lose some, like, typal synergies or whatever. But, I mean, 3 mana, 3/3 haste that can't be blocked by your opponent's best creature, and then progressively gets bigger each turn and can be blocked by less things. I don't think that's a card to snuff at. Like, I don't even think this is like a not for us card. I think this gets there if we wanted to try it out over a different 3-drop. I think the power level's there. I hate the name Gornog, but whatever. Small gripes.
Yeah, Gornog sounds like the name of like a big bad in a fantasy or a sci-fi story from like the 1970s.
Yeah, it does. Not a Minotaur.
Gornog, consumer of universes. I think that this is like strong enough. It's just especially at the 3-drop slot in Cube in a lot of colors, I just think that there are so many strong options that it can be like a little head spinny, like what do I want to play with? So I think you can play with this one, especially if you, like, let's say you're in like a Gruul deck and you go like turn 1 Dork into this, and then like every time your opponent plays a blocker, you're just like, no, you didn't. It's like not for this, and it gets progressively bigger. Like it's going to have to eat a removal spell eventually. It's not doing anything particularly like synergistic, but the whole Cowards versus Warriors thing is cool. I like it well enough. It doesn't like sing to me, but I think it's a solid card.
I guess one thing to note here is if you're playing against control that's not putting creatures on board, it isn't actually functionally a 3/3. It's going to be a 2/3 there. And then like if they play a creature and you get it up to 3/3 and then that creature leaves the battlefield, it goes back down to 2/3. So like just baseline saying this is a 3/3 haste for 3 is like a little misleading, but that is how it's going to play out.
It sounds like if I have attacking creatures and my opponent has no blockers, I'm probably winning though, right?
Not if you're using turn 3 to just get in 2 damage. They might just shrug that off and be like, okay, I'm going to use this turn to do this thing instead.
Yeah,
but, I get your point.
Yeah, I think this card also becomes much more exciting if you're doing any sort of party or like type of warrior type stuff. I know some people's cubes have little packages for those. Obviously, the more cards you have that interact favorably with the type lines on this, the better this is going to be.
Another 1-drop somebody wanted to mention here.
Remember when Stromkirk Noble was just like the best 1-drop and you played it on turn 1 and your opponent would just sigh? I don't know if this might have been before your time, but this card used to be
Innistrad was right before I started playing, so.
I remember seeing this in Cube lists once upon a time. This is like the ultimate in like a snowball design, right? And that's not even it's not like the most powerful snowball design, but it's like the ultimate in like if you don't play this on exactly turn 1, it's pretty bad. Obviously, like in Constructed, when you can put 4 of them in your deck and increase the likelihood that you're going to have one, but like, yeah, I don't know. This doesn't get there anymore.
Oh, no, not at all. I just wanted to point out how far Magic Design has come, because this used to be the grown test 1-drop of Standard, and now they have Heartfire Hero.
Yeah.
I never realized how digitally Michael Jackson-y the face of this
Oh, shit, it really is. Oh, God. Can you imagine somebody like doing that at you, but they also have fangs? That would be really creepy.
Oh, yeah. No, don't do that.
All right, big reprint here.
2 burn spells. Hit us.
So first up, we got Burst Lightning, a classic. It's a single red mana for an instant with kicker 4. So you'd have to pay 4 to red. Burst Lightning deals 2 damage to any target. If it was kicked, it deals 4 damage instead. 90% of the time, this is shock, but when it's not, it upgrades to kill a 4/4, and it is still outclassed by Foil Tarmogoyf.
Yeah, it's not as good as Foil Tarmogoyf. Yeah, this is just an upgrade to shock, and we still play shock. So, bye-bye shock.
Bye-bye shock.
They baited us a couple of sets ago because they gave like I think it was a sleeve of an alternate art Burst Lightning, and it didn't put the card in the set. It was like, what?
Yeah, they had this Burst Lightning art on Arena, but they never gave us the card Burst Lightning. It's like, what? Why did you give us the sleeve then?
Yeah. And then our final red card is Fiery Annihilation. It is 2 and a red for an instant. Deal 5 damage to target creature. Exile up to 1 equipment card attached to that creature. And if the creature would die this turn, you exile it instead. So this is...
Hold on. Teld, did you put this card on the list?
He must have. Yep.
Chris, do you see this meta he's trying to make around Stoneforge now?
Yep, I do.
Not only, like, I support Stoneforge all the way, but now we have to have the Stoneforge counterplay.
Now we have to talk about this card that's worse than Soulseer. Yep.
Wait, worse than Soulseer? Isn't this strictly better?
No, Soulseer makes creatures not have indestructible if they have them.
Yeah, exiling an equipment is way better.
Soulseer also hits Planeswalkers.
Sure.
I think. Look, this card
better.
is exactly as good as like the dominance of your equipment.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I didn't mention this specifically for us, but I just wanted to shout it out as a card that if you have equipment themes in your cube, we don't really have an equipment theme outside of Stoneforge, right? But if you have equipment theme, if you've got a lot of really good equipment, if you're playing cards like Cauldron Complete or Batterskull or whatever, this is a card that provides counterplay to those cards.
Yeah, it does cleanly answer living weapon equipment. This would kill like dissection tools plus the creature. This would kill like cryptic coat plus the creature, but we're not so heavy on that. Like Stoneforge is literally the only equipment payoff we have, so like we're not heavy enough to want this.
I wasn't mentioning this for us specifically, despite that being apparently the in joke. But yeah, this is a really good pickup for the amount of equipment that they're putting into play, and particularly those living weapons that are difficult to interact with. This one's really good at that.
Sure. Good shout there. I like that shout. Moves us into green, where we've got it looks like 5 creatures and no spells to talk about. Did you notice They actually like downgraded a lot of the green removal for the set. It's like back to bite down. There's a clear shot that's a sorcery instead of an instant that I've been calling unclear shot. They just like made bad green removal. But anyway, 5 creatures to talk about. The first is kind of a banger from the Jumpstart set. It's Scythe Cat Cub, 1 in a green for a 2/2 rare cat to go with our Arabo from the beginning, bringing it full circle there. It has trample and it has a landfall. Whenever your land enters under your control, put a +1 counter on target creature. If this is the second time the ability has resolved this turn, double the number of +1 counters on that creature. So, Bristly Bill adjacent, Whiskery Bill as I'm calling it, 2 mana 2/2 that throws around counters when you play lands. Turns out Bristly Bill is a very powerful card. The upside by comparison, this has trample. Bristly Bill does not have trample. This can do some pretty busted things with multi-land cards like fetch lands and ramp spells and stuff like that. Bristly Bill, however, has the 5 mana activation that doubles the +1 counters on all creatures that already have counters. I don't have a strong say in which one I think is better, but I do think they're both very powerful cards. And I don't know that I would have looked at this card super closely if we didn't already have Bristly Bill, but that card has just been phenomenal. And this card reads at least comparable, if not like better in a lot of senses.
I think you might have misread the card, because you're mentioning here in the notes, and I don't know if you actually, I'm sorry if I missed if you didn't say this, but you haven't mentioned that a fetch land puts 4 +1/+1 counters on it, and it doesn't actually do that, because it doesn't. It's a replacement trigger. So.
Oh, it's instead. Okay, sure. So yeah, that I don't think I said it out loud, but I was under the impression that like you still got the +1/+1 counter with the second landfall trigger. That's not true. It replaces the +1 by doubling. So a fetch land would only put 2 +1/+1 counters.
Yeah, unless you already had counters on it.
You're right, but still, I mean, that just means it does like the Bristly Bill thing. So maybe this is just Bristly Bill with trample then.
Yeah, well, Bristly Bill with trample that also is missing the big mana sink function, which I think is the scariest part of Bristly Bill, actually.
Yeah.
The more I've played Bristly Bill, that 5 mana being able to just like, all right, untap, swing all my dudes. Would you like to block or would you like to die? And then, you put your opponent in these unwinnable situations. This card doesn't do that. That being said, I don't think it's a card that has to exist separately from Bristly Bill necessarily, because it does have trample. It kind of encourages you. So Bristly Bill kind of encourages you to put your counters on a bunch of other creatures, because Bristly Bill is such a dangerous card. And this one weirdly encourages you to put it on this one, because you want to stack up the counters on one creature to double them on a big trampler. So I think they kind of have different play patterns just by having very similar text boxes. I think Bristly Bill is probably just the better card overall, but Bristly Bill is also, I think, might be the single best green card in the entire cube.
Which is funny because we passed on it initially. I think that if you are going to stack the counters on the creature that's doing the thing, then the fact that this has trample makes it significantly better, in my opinion, than Bill. The thing is about Bill, like, it has the activated, and I don't actually even think too much about the activated on Bill. It's mostly that Bill, like, in a single turn, if I have 2 creatures I want to put counters on in a fetch land, I can put 1 counter on one and 1 counter on the other. Whereas this card, much more, as we mentioned, much more heavily incentivizes you to Voltron it up, right? Because the doubling of the +1/+1 counters is only better than putting a +1/+1 counter on something if you already have 2 +1/+1 counters on it.
Yeah, and you also, the second time, you can't actually put it on a different creature if they don't already have one, because it's a replacement effect.
Exactly.
Right? So if they, I think this card is worse than Bill, but better at creating like one singular big creature. But both of them are very good, would probably be my assumption.
I find it a little confusing that they printed this so quickly after printing Bill, because it has so many like ostensible similarities. Green 2-drops these days, like the green 2-drop slot is just like loaded with, here's a 2-drop that when you do a thing, it gets bigger. We have Sharp-Eyed Rookie, a bunch of other different cards. I could see playing this in addition to Bill, but then the question is, like, what do we cut? And also the question is, like, how many effects that are similar to this do we want at the green 2-drop slot? So, yeah. I don't know.
And then you have Tumblewag on 3 as well. I mean, it would make, like, that package of cards much more, like, synergistic with one another, but then, like, we mentioned this in our Hidden Archetypes episode, like, we're not really promoting +1/+1 counter decks. It just incidentally happens.
It's just kind of happening.
Yeah.
This is a good card. If you haven't played Bristly Bill, and you're not really sure how that card plays, that's a good card. This is also
if you
a
have
good
played
card.
Bristly Bill and it's entirely unreasonable, I think this is worse a little bit. Not like crazy amounts worse. This is the kind of power banding I was talking about earlier, where if you're just looking for a card that's like a step down from Bill, I think this is probably in that range.
Yeah, I agree. It's very weird to see this here. It sounds like the team making Jumpstart was not communicating with the team that was working on standard cards. So let's move on from Scythe Cat Cub there. Quick mention for Bloom Tender. This is a special guest slot card. It's a reprint from like Eventide or something like that. 1 and a green for a 1/1 mythic rare elf druid. For each color among permanents you control, you add 1 mana of that color. So in order for this to be better than literally any other mana dork you would consider, you have to have 2 different colors among the permanents on your board. At that point it becomes quite good, and then obviously it's like really good in Omnath decks and stuff like that. So I wanted to mention this. I don't know that this is better than the other 2-drop mana accelerants we're playing, because those ones are more consistent and have better bodies. But this has higher upside, so it's worth a mention at the very least.
Yeah, I think one thing we've learned is these, especially the 2 mana ones, the 1 mana ones can kind of get away with just being a blank card that trades a card for a mana, essentially. But these 2 mana ones really do need to have some amount of of upside, right? They need to be very, very difficult to interact with, or they need to be able to put pressure on your opponent, particularly your control opponents, later into the game, and this does neither of those things. So I'm not into it, but it's a cool card to have on the client.
The floor is way lower, the ceiling is way higher, and like I think it depends. Like if you really want to promote like multicolor green, then this can obviously do some pretty busted stuff. Like you play this on 2, and then you cast like a multicolor card like Reflector Mage on turn 3, and then like tap this for 3 mana and cast something else. But you just really got to ask yourself, like, do you want like the famine, or like, holy shit, you just spent 6 mana in 1 turn off the back of this 1 card kind of play patterns floating around your cube? That's up to you. I don't like it.
Yeah. There's probably a home for this in somebody's cube. The gold cube, maybe. I don't know. Next up, Spinner of Souls. 2 and a green for a 4/3 rare Spider Spirit with Reach. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you may reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature. Put it into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library. So very simple effect, but very powerful as well. This is like the ultimate lightning rod, because if they don't kill this, any other creature you control that dies just draws you into another creature. And it never misses either. It's not even like reveal the top card if it's a creature put in your hand. You just reveal until you hit a creature, and you just get that. So everything just replaces itself, which is kind of feels like a joke sometimes. Like, it's gonna be so brutal. The control deck that can't kill this, it's just gonna be like, okay, well, I can't kill any of your other stuff because it just draws you into another creature. And it's a 4/3 reach for 3, like pretty decent stats too.
Yeah, it's kind of this is kind of a cool plant for. I mean, you just play this like your random green decks, right? It's just like a solid enough card, but also kind of synergizes with the ever growing number of green black sack cards that we have, where it'll do the thing, and like, you know, you sack for your white, or you sack for, you know, your 2/2 guy that becomes unblockable and draws a card. Now you draw another creature on top of that. You know, cool.
Doesn't work with tokens, which is like ostensibly what you want to be sacrificing, but in the face of a board wipe, like, you've got Land War Elves into your 4-drop, and your opponent has to Day of Judgment you're just going to replace those. It's not even once per turn. You just get a creature for every other creature that dies. They had the sensibility to not trigger on itself dying, which means that your opponent can bolt it and be done with it, but they do have to kind of do that, I think.
Yeah, I also think Reach is one of those mechanics that, as we've gotten more and more of our blue section being flying, green has really struggled to interact with a lot of these blue creatures. And I think having, there's been an ask from a couple of members of the community for more Reach creatures. So anytime we get one that's like kind of playable that also has Reach, I'm interested in trying it out.
Yeah, I think that this is a pretty awesome card for like your Gruul Stompy decks, right? Because like ramping into this on turn 3, it's not necessarily like super impressive. It's fine. It's probably just going to eat a Doomblade or trade. But like, if you go like Sharp-Eyed Rookie into this, you know, your Sharp-Eyed Rookie is a 3/3 Vig that's going to keep making value going forward. You attack. If your opponent trades off for it, like, you investigated and then you just drew another creature card. It's pretty strong. If you have a different 3-drop in your hand, what I would probably do is go that 3-drop into like your 4-drop, and then like on turn 5, maybe like 2 mana effect plus this jam. And now if your opponent wants to trade for your big green creatures that are going to just eat up their life total, they're going to have to let you draw a bunch of cards. I think this is solid. I think this is worth the test.
Yeah, rock solid card. not too hard to evaluate either. Just kind of has all the right knobs. I wanted to mention the 7-drop here because this is another one that I think is just a really cool card. I think it's actually a reprint from a commander deck as well. Somber Walled Beastmaster is 6 and a green for a 1/1 rare human ranger. When it enters, make a 2/2 wolf token, a 3/3 beast creature token, and a 4/4 beast creature token. Super annoying to have two different sized tokens of the same creature there, but this is 10 power and toughness across 4 bodies for 7 mana. And then the creature tokens you control have Death Touch thing. Not nothing, especially because it applies to these tokens as well. I see this as like Hornet Queen adjacent. Gives you a body to blink, reanimate, stuff like that. Kind of works if you're trying to push like any sort of token strategies. You know, Toby, for example, is a good example of a card that like wants you to push token strategies without like warping everything around it. So it's competing in a cube like ours with like Titan of Industry and even at 6 Tovolar's Huntmaster and stuff like that. And I think it's like probably losing those comparisons, but this is a neat card. Cool blink target, fine reanimation target, cool token payoff. Just turns a lot of knobs where I could see this showing up in someone's cube. I think it'd be quite powerful there.
Yeah, it's cool. The design is not exciting to me, and if we were going to play another 7-drop, I'd probably look at like the dinosaur or something first. But it is a cool card. It's a really weird card. It makes these like largish tokens and gives them Death Touch. It's really strange.
We've mentioned quite a number of times about the Grave Titans in recent. Like
so four bodies.
Yeah, this is just like 4 bodies. Yeah, it's like that's kind of wild.
It's worth noting this was in the Crimson Vow commander deck where they had the Coven mechanic that cared about having creatures with 3 different powers. That's cool. So this was like it's weird that it puts 4 bodies though instead of 3, but whatever.
Yeah, I do think this is one of the more like reasonable 7-drop. Like doesn't instantly win the game, but puts you far enough ahead that you probably win the game.
Yeah, it's cool. Like, again, this is like the 3rd time I mention a card that's like, probably doesn't get there, but is cool enough to mention. So, which I like, especially for a reprint. It's nice to see those cards actually come to Arena. Who added the big purple bear?
Don't look at me.
That was me. I don't think this card's very good, but I actually did kind of enjoy the flavor of this card. So it's, Herska Sweet Tooth, it's 2 and a green for a 3/3 legendary bear, and whenever it attacks, you make a food token. When you gain life, you can pay a Selesnya hybrid, and when you do, target creature gets +X until end of turn, where X is the amount of life you gain. It's just kind of cool, like combat trick adjacent creature. It's probably more of a commander card type card, but I don't know. It's just nifty, and like it's a big silly bear eating honey, surrounded by bees.
It is a big silly bear, big anime bear.
Yeah, not much to say here. Just it's another one of those designs where it's like, oh, that's cool. It like kind of does the thing and like lets you set up attacks and could have some cool little synergies with this card. So
this feels like if you guys / we ever actually buckled down and do like a build around cube, maybe there's a world where this gets there with life gain synergies and artifact synergies and
like
stuff that.
The food sort of stuff. Yeah. This feels like the synergy cube we were talking about a ways back. If we ever get around to making it, will be in the green food section.
Gold cards. There's actually very few colorless and gold cards to talk about. A lot of them were reprints to kind of flesh out the limited format, and some of the new gold cards are just kind of limited fodder. So the one that I wanted to mention here is Boros Charm, which is a pretty well-known reprint, red-white for an instant. Choose one, deal 4 damage to target player or planeswalker, or permanents you control gain indestructible until an end of turn, or target creature gains double strike. Very flexible Boros card. You usually want to like have a burn component to your Boros deck before you play this, and then you have to like question whether you want Lightning Helix plus Boros Charm, or one or the other, or neither, things like that. But there's a lot of flexibility. This card has been regularly decent throughout Magic history. You don't see it in cubes a lot, though, for a lot of reasons. But just wanted to mention that one just to kind of get it out of the way and, earmark it. But it does bring us to a much different card. Chris, is this you adding the Nerd's Rope creature to the
Nerd's Rope? Man, the art on this is so much weaker than the other Coma.
It's
I just want to mention it because it's just a stupid Coma design. It's Coma World Eater, 3 green, blue. Of course, the spell can't be countered. Own the blues or whatever. Sorry, that was a bad joke.
This thing's an 8/12. Holy shit! I never even looked at the stat line of this card.
Yeah,
so it's an infinite.
It's a 7 mana, can't be countered, 8/12 trample, ward 4, which is not exactly hexproof, but it will make it difficult to remove, especially if this gets ramped out. And then whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you create 4 3/3 serpent creature tokens.
So what some of you at home are reading is Ward 4, but what is actually on the card that they forgot to print is protection from red and green.
And blue, it can't be countered.
Oh, and blue, sure. Yeah, but this card, you're just never burn spelling this card, ever.
What is this design? Why is it an 8/12? I swear to God, I have not, because I just kind of checked out after we're doing Coma again.
Are we just AI the stat lines here? Like, are we just making them up? Like, just randomly generating
This is the same set that has the 6 mana 12/8 at uncommon.
Oh, it's in there so that you can trade for Coma and then they get 4/3.
Okay, can I just a little gripe about this Coma? Because I ignored the card completely when I saw it and read the text box, and I was like, okay, whatever. Like, I saw you guys did the other thing with the other Coma. When they were advertising this set and when they were talking about it, they said the whole crux of the set, like the designs and everything, was what would a set look like if it was just called Magic the Gathering? That's their words, like almost word for word. How is Coma evocative of Magic the Gathering? Like, what about this design or this character or the original card is like, this is what Magic the Gathering is about? I don't see it, and the art is like, it looks like Nerd's Rope. Like,
well, see, in the year of our Lord 2024, this is big dumb thing that can't be interacted with and then wins the game off of a stupid snowbally mechanic. This is like,
is this the card you want a new player to see when
this is big,
when they're
this is Magic the Gathering. This is what
let
it
me
is.
get in. Yeah, the same set that's like trying to bait you with Shivan Dragon at uncommon and Sarah Angel reprint. It's like that's what Magic is, or like what people think of. They don't think of whatever this is.
This card is I don't even know if this card's good, but it's wild for sure. Like, it'll be a limited bomb obviously, but
yeah, it's just dumb. This is poor card design. This is all right. Chris, did you have anything positive to say?
No. I just wanted to point out that they did this. Okay, who put Ailey on here?
That was me. I just wanted to mention this as it's a pretty decent stat line. So Ailey, Eternal Pilgrim, is white-black for a 2/3 Death Touch. And you can pay 1, sacrifice another creature, you gain life equal to its toughness, and then you can pay 1 white-black, sacrifice another creature, and exile target non-land permanent. Activate only if you have at least 10 or more life, more than your starting total. More of a commander card, to be honest. This is kind of a card you want to build your whole deck around, but stat line's pretty decent, and it's just a nifty little card. This is the one that I liked a lot when it was originally printed, so just wanted to mention this one because it's kind of cool.
Cheap sack outlet. It's a fine card.
Mostly my interest in it is that it is a nice new commander for Brawl that does something kind of cool.
Yeah, I think if this had been printed in current year, this would also have lifelink. I'm surprised it doesn't, actually.
Well, 2015 Battle for Zendikar Oath of the Gatewatch was like, as much as people hate to admit it, was actually like peak card design where they made cards not egregiously good and you actually had to do things to make your cards good. Ailey's just a good design. Like, it does not need lifelink, but you're right. If it was printed in modern day, it would have lifelink. Who added the who raise your hand in the office if you added the new worm coil to the list?
I didn't add this either.
Hi.
Okay, this is another one that I left off because I was like, surely one of those two will put it on. I'll make them copy and paste it.
I'm sorry, the symmetry, the elegance of this card, I couldn't get over it. So it's a Sire of 7 Deaths. It is a 7 mana 7/7 with 7 keywords. It has First Strike, Vigilance, Minish, Trample, Reach, Lifelink, and Ward Pay 7 life. This card is perfectly symmetrical. The only thing that could have been better is if the text box had 7 words in it, in the flavor text, but it doesn't.
You're never going to guess how many arms are in the art.
Oh, does it have 7 arms?
Yeah, it has 7 arms, man. Of course it has 7 arms. Isn't Sire of 7 Deaths a Buffalo Wild Wings flavor?
Holy moly! There's 7. Okay, the flavor text box is cool because there's 7 words before the comma and then 7 words after the comma, so it's perfectly symmetrical. Okay, yeah, I love this card. I don't actually want to play it. I just thought it was really cool.
No, yeah. I mean, I do think this is a viable ramp target. It's kind of a miserable card, I think.
Oh yeah. This is like
lifelink being
if you can't answer it, you like get to keep playing the game.
Also, if you can't answer it, it's ward pay 7 life. That's just brutal. Yeah, okay. I mean, big, flashy, dumb, mythic rare to close out the card reviews there. No land cycle, notably, which is interesting because I think there was an opportunity for this, being foundation set to have like a good backbone land cycle in here, but the land cycle they went with was the Scry lands, which they didn't even have the courtesy of bumping down to uncommon. I would have been perfectly fine with the Scry lands if they were uncommon instead of rare, but it's so weird to have Scry lands be kind of the backbone land cycle when you already have the Surveil lands in standard. But again, small gripes, but that is the last card here, which moves us into like initial impressions, or rather final impressions after reviewing cards. And I don't have much to say that wasn't already said in the episode itself when we were talking about cards, other than like I like that this set exists. I like what it's doing for standard. I'm sure standard will be better for having something like this exist, and we'll see 5 years from now, if Magic survives Universes Beyond, like what they end up doing with foundations. I will say, like, there's very little here that excites me. I mean, I added 3 cards to this list that we talked about that I thought were cool, like the Drake Tamer and the Reanimation Demon and the 7-drop that makes a bunch of tokens. But I can't say there's anything in this set that I'm like, wow, like this excites me. Like I want to play with this card. It's just clean designs, fine cards, rock solid creatures and rock solid spells, but nothing that excites me. No new mechanics to latch onto, which is usually my favorite part of new sets. So like this is very much a not for me set that's still going to give us enough for Cube that like it's worth talking about and worth investing time into. I'm not excited about the limited format whatsoever, so put a little bow on that. Like I'm cool with this set existing. I'm cool with the Jumpstart editions, but my excitement level is low. This is not for me. This is for other people. This is for people getting into Magic. This is for standard players. And I'm happy that they get this product dedicated to them. Though Wizards of the Coast did try to have their cake and eat it too by including like some random commander cards in the standard collection. Like the whole idea of this being like, this set is for standard. This is going to redefine standard. But we're also going to throw in special guests and commander cards. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's like, okay, I get what you're doing. I do think they missed the mark on the whole, this is what a set named Magic the Gathering would feel like. It's like, yeah, you have like 5 nostalgia baiting cards in the set, and then everything else just doesn't really seem to line up with that statement at all. So those are my thoughts on Foundations. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned if this is like what a Magic the Gathering set, if it was just Magic the Gathering, would look like, what that means for the future of our involvement in the game, to be honest with you. I did sort of get the vibe there was a lot of nostalgia baiting, and like the art didn't really appeal to me in most cases. There was some decent designs. There was a ton of anime stuff, especially in the Jumpstart stuff. And I mean, this set, I felt like a lot of the cards, we were just sort of talking about them to talk about them, which is, there was a few of them that really excited me, but there were a lot of cards here that we just kind of went through that just they kind of existed. There were a few nifty, clean designs here and there, but overall, pretty low excitement level on this set as well. Not super excited for Aether Drift, though that one I'm willing to acknowledge I'll probably be more excited by the time we get to it. And then especially the back half of this year, with the multiple universes beyonds, just kind of low on Magic in general with some of these decisions. And I'm hoping that they will exceed expectations and continue putting out good product, but I don't think this set necessarily accomplishes what their goals that they set out were. And I worry a little bit about some of these cards existing in standard for 5 years, where they're either going to have to power creep them so that people will buy the new product, or they're just, they're just a lot of concerns I have here. But overall, a lot of clean designs, which lends itself well to Cube.
I will say, and then I'll get your opinion here, Chris, that of the cards we talked about, 18 of them are actual new cards from the main set. A lot of the other ones are Jumpstart cards or reprints and stuff like that. So Foundations, the main set, provided us with less than 20 cards worth talking about, and some of those were things like a Robbo, like cat creature type stuff. So a little light on the conversational points as far as like the actual main set goes. Chris, Foundations, how's it hitting for you?
I mean, I don't think it was supposed to be like an evocative set, so it didn't strike me as one. I theoretically kind of like the idea of creating a more stable standard card pool. but it doesn't really impact me very much personally. We got some cool reprints. We didn't get any reprints that like filled holes for me that I was like, oh man, when are they going to give us this card? It's fine. I mean, it's not an exciting set, but we're going to play some of the cards. I think it landed about the way that it's supposed to, really, without like a creative direction. So it's fine. Yeah.
Side tangent to that, what kind of holes do you think we have that need to be filled? Like, what kind of cards would you even see that? Like, I mean, this set gave us things like Vents or Dark Confidant, you know, as like hole-filling cards from Magic's past. Like, what type of things do you think we could even get that give us something we want or don't have?
Honestly, man, there isn't really a whole lot that's missing. Like, most of it is not going to be creatures these days because they just keep printing creatures that are better than the old creatures that we wanted. I mean, shit, V-Click has come and gone. I mean, if I'm honest, mostly I just want, like, Cryptic Command and Mystic Confluence and, like, the better blue cantrips. So that's kind of it, actually.
Fair enough. Yeah, I only asked that because it's like, you know, if every set goes by, we're like, oh, Magic didn't fill any holes, but we don't actually identify what those holes are. It's like, are we ever going to be satisfied that we didn't fill the holes that we didn't identify in the first place? You know,
I basically just want my classic blue cards that still hold up. And as far as creatures go, I mean, you know, the holes that need to be filled, quote unquote, is just becoming smaller and smaller. Like Pioneer Masters is coming out, and I should be really pumped about that. But they've given us so much of it, or stuff that's better that, yeah.
Yeah, we can actually probably dig through that and see like what kind of cards we're missing that we would even be excited about, because I can't imagine it's that much
we're
that we don't
sort
already
of
have on the card pool.
We're sort of in an era of Magic where I feel like power creep and is just pushing out all these old cards. Like if you look at what's going on in Standard and Pioneer, especially right now, Pioneer's got the whole backlog of Magic from like RTR, but like the best decks in Pioneer outside of Phoenix, which is admittedly built around that RTR card, but like the Prowess deck runs off of Heartfire Hero and a bunch of other cards that were printed in like the last 3 sets. And then both of the mono black as well as black red mid-range decks are really honing in around Unstoppable Slasher and Unholy Annex out of the most recent set. And that's just, they've just completely displaced the previous value card options for the most part. So we're really seeing that each set, especially in the recent years, just has these extremely, extremely push powerful cards that are displacing long held cards. And I think we're getting to the point where the sort of forced rotation that we felt with Modern Horizon sets might just be every Standard set now.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's my worry that I had before we saw Foundations, and still kind of my worry now after seeing the set is, we don't have to go super far deep into this, but just to kind of express it again, like, is this set going to actually serve a purpose? Because, like, sure, you can throw Opt in this set, right? And say, oh, Standard's always going to have a cantrip, but then if you then print a cantrip in every other Standard set around it, whether it's Opt or something different, it's like, what did you really, like, what was the purpose of having the default cantrip? Same with, like, Planar Outburst, right? Or not Planar Outburst, Day of Judgment, for example. They're not going to just stop printing White Wraths in new Standard sets, right? So if those end up being good, then what was the point of having the baseline Day of Judgment if you're just going to have more powerful options that you're supposed to play instead? And they kind of have to do that, right? They kind of have to have more powerful options in the other Standard sets. They can't have Foundations be more powerful than the stuff coming out after it. Otherwise, people will have no reason to invest in that set. So, like, did you set the bar low here on Foundations so that you could have more powerful stuff in later sets?
This
and you can't set the bar.
Yeah,
you can't set the bar too high on Foundations, otherwise the stuff in later sets is weaker. So, like, maybe this ends up just not really serving that much of a purpose. Like, you get a couple cards, like a couple glue cards here and there that see play in Standard throughout the next, like, 4 or 5 years or such, but, like, everything else is just power crept by the sets around it. It's kind of like, you know, where does this end up falling? And I'm curious to see where that all hashes out. Again, I have no skin in the Standard game. I don't care about Standard. I do not care what ends up breaking Standard or what doesn't. It's just curious, like, will this end up, you know, 5 years from now? Will we look back at Foundations and be like, was this set just like a core set that was there for the sake of printing more cards, and like it was just under the premise that it was supposed to revolutionize Standard? I don't know. We'll see. I don't see anything that really pops out in this set that I'm like, oh, that's going to be a standard mainstay for the next 4 years. Like, it just doesn't strike me as that.
Yeah, I'm sort of in the same boat. I think the lack of really pushing some of these effects. I mean, like if they printed Ponder in this set, I might be like, okay, well maybe in the next few sets we're just not going to see like a really pushed blue cantrip. We're not going to see, we'll see more synergistic blue cantrips. But I think really setting the bar here a little bit low overall. There's some all right designs, but also they tried to really push some themes in what's supposed to be an otherwise like generic set. Like having the cat themes felt really weird, given that that's not what I think of when I think of Magic and white creatures. I think it would have been soldiers or humans if I'd been designing the set.
Cat things a little. The goblin stuff makes sense. There's a lot of elf stuff too that didn't come up here, and like they're clearly like, oh, goblins and elves, you're supposed to be playing that in standard, at least for casual folk. But like the cat thing is a little weird, I admit. I agree. I think that's probably a good place to close out this episode. Yep. And we're getting underneath the 3-hour mark for a set review. That's nice. So, as always, just a reminder, check out our socials. You can find us on Twitter at JankDiverGaming, YouTube.com/JankDiverGaming. And hey, if you're listening on YouTube and you made it to the end of the episode, just hit the subscribe button or hit a like. It helps out quite a bit. Appreciate that. And reminder that you can find Teld streaming on twitch.tv/TeldTalks or on YouTube at Teld Talks as well. Our next episode that will be out, well, Teld and I are going to do the peasant review episode, and I think we're inviting Danelius on to help us with that. He's got a lot of opinions about it. He kind of hashed out his thoughts on the set, so that'll be a nice way to get Danelius on the podcast after we lost that last episode, that really good Peasant Cube episode. But we'll be doing a set review with 3 people for Peasant Cube. And then following that, we have our little rant episode about the Universes Beyond announcements and the standard rotation of 2025, which we recorded actually 2 weeks ago now, maybe a week ago, I don't know. But we have that one already recorded, and we'll get that one out next. So plenty, stay tuned. I guess after that, we'll probably be doing like Pioneer Masters. So we're getting back into Infinite spoiler season, which I don't mind so much. Other people hate it, but that's going to go ahead and do it for this episode. Thanks for hanging out and listening to our thoughts on Foundations. If you have any thoughts of your own, or you think we're underrating a card, overrating a card, come join that Discord server and let us know what you're thinking. But that's going to go ahead and do it. Thanks for hanging out, everybody, and we will catch you all next time. The year is 2045. Listen up, listen up. Omnath has finally been printed with the 6th color in Magic. Hasbro president Post Malone has purchased the 1-to-1 copy of the second ring from the re-release of The Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth. Wizards of the Coast has cut ties with artist Raymond Swanlin for submitting hand-drawn sketches, which goes against their strictly AI-only digital art policy. Squidward is officially off the modern ban list, though Splinter Twin remains. Magic's new non-rotating constructed format Colonist is set to launch on December 2nd. Foundations 2 puts Sensei's Divine and Top into standard for the next 5 years. Siege Rhino's recent downshift to common has shaken up the Pauper metagame. All 3 Pauper players have expressed concern. Meat Hook Massacre 3 flops at the box office. Orcish Bowmasters added to the reserved list. Universes Beyond Rugrats scheduled for a November release, followed shortly after by The Walking Dead 2 Undead Boogaloo. The upcoming Magic the Gathering Netflix TV show is no longer happening, says show writers. The Arena Direct Challenge bug still in effect. Renin 14 has been banned in Legacy. The Kicker Dinosaurs from Modern Horizon 6 proved too strong for the format. Magic's newest unset hits shelves near you in early August. Pre-order your boxes of unfucking believable now before stores sell out. Pro Tour Return to Ravnica comes to a close. Nathan Stoyer continues his 16-tournament streak as Pro Tour champion. This just in, Luis Scott Vargas expecting triplets. Cross-compatibility between MTGO and the PlayStation 15 still under construction, says Sony executives. Saffron Olive's presidential bid falls through. Democratic House in complete panic. Magic's latest big bad villain finally confirmed. Prepare yourself for the Fibblethip arc, starting with Return to Chandelar and ending with Arabian Nights 2. Solarian Community College becomes the first Magic YouTube channel to reach 1 trillion subscribers. And of course, Taco Tuesday has been officially recognized as a national holiday.